He growled at my stepfather and saved my life. I used to think he was just an old stray. Then he saved me from the man I thought I could trust most. When Arden's mother remarried, everyone in town said she was lucky. Roland was successful, generous, even helped fund medical scholarships for underprivileged kids. But the dog scarred, silent, and unwanted wouldn't stop growling at him. They called him dangerous. Arden called him Finn. And when a secret folder in the attic revealed a crest-matching one burned into Finn's old military tage, everything changed. She followed the clues. The truth led to missing children, redacted files, and a story no one wanted told. The forest was supposed to be safe. It was part of the school's annual nature trip, a simple 2-hour hike through Pine Bluff Ridge, with teachers flanking both sides of the line and bright yellow raincoats bobbing like ducklings in single file. But 9-year-old Arden Blake had wandered. Not far, just enough. It started with a butterfly, a monarch, wings speckled with orange like stained glass, had drifted past her cheek and beckoned her without a sound. She stepped off the path, just for a moment, to follow its dance. But the moment stretched too long, and when she looked back, the trail was gone, blurred in a sea of identical pine trunks, swaying like giants whispering secrets. The chill of the highland breeze prickled her arms as she turned in a slow circle. "Hello?" she called, voice thin, swallowed by the canopy. "Miss Lorraine?" No answer. Her boots crunched pine needles as she pushed forward, unsure of what forward even meant anymore. The woods were beautiful in that deceptive, haunting waybeams of late afternoon sunlight piercing through the green above, painting stripes of gold across the forest floor. But beneath the quiet, something else hummed. Not danger, something heavier. Then she heard it, a sound so soft it almost didn't exist. A whimper, a gasp, not human. She crouched instinctively, holding her breath. Her eyes scanned left, then right, and landed on a sloping trail of flattened grass that dipped between two boulders down toward a silvery shimmer. A creek, and just beside it, half hidden beneath a pile of leaves and mud, was a shape dark, trembling, broken. Arden crept forward, her breath caught. It was a dog, no something more than that. A large German shepherd, body caked in dried blood and dirt, one hind leg twisted unnaturally. Its chest rose in short, shallow bursts, ribs exposed beneath matted fur. A torn harness barely clung to one shoulder, its reflective strip scratched and unreadable. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just blinked, slow, resigned. Her instinct was to run to call an adult, scream, do something. But her feet didn't move. Instead, her eyes locked with the dog's, not pleading, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from a chase, but from years of being chased. And suddenly, she wasn't scared anymore. Arden shrugged off her backpack, unzipped her raincoat, and slipped it from her shoulders. Without thinking, she knelt beside the shepherd and draped the coat over his body, tucking it beneath his side like she'd seen her mom do with patients at the hospital. His fur was warm, too warm, but he didn't resist her touch. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." The dog's ear twitched. Thunder rolled in the distance. She looked. Up clouds were racing over the ridge, bloated and gray. Raindrops kissed her cheeks like tiny icy needles, and the pine trees groaned under the weight of the wind. The temperature dropped sharply, and the smell of petrichor filled the air. "Hold on," Arden murmured, her voice trembling. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small fleece lunch napkin her mom had packed. It smelled faintly of peanut butter. She folded it into a triangle and pressed it gently to the worst of the dog's wounds, a gash near the ribs. He flinched, but didn't move. Somewhere behind her, a voice was Kalinga teacher's voice, distant, panicked. Arden didn't answer. Her heart thudded. She looked down at the shepherd again. His eyes had fluttered shut. "No," she whispered, patting his flank gently. "Stay awake, please." She didn't know why she said it. Only that silence suddenly felt dangerous. The rain fell harder now, streaking her hair to her cheeks. Lightning spidered across the sky with a roar. But she stayed. She stayed while the water crept up around her boots. Stayed while her clothes stuck to her skin and her lips turned pale. She stayed because something inside her said the dog wouldn't survive another 10 minutes alone. So she talked. About anything. About her science project, her fear of 5th grade, the fact that she used to be scared of thunderstorms but wasn't anymore. Her voice cracked sometimes, but she kept going, whispering like she was singing a lullaby. The shepherd's tail moved, just once brushing over her fingers. Then, through the wall of rain and pine needles, she heard them. Voices. Closer now. Flashlights slicing through the shadows. "Over here!" she screamed, shooting up from her crouch and waving both arms. "Down here! He's hurt." Footsteps thundered down the slope, bright yellow jackets. A teacher's voice. "Arden? Oh my God!" Adults surrounded her. Someone slipped an emergency blanket over her shoulders. Someone else bent beside the dog, radioing for backup. Arden didn't register much, only that she was being lifted gently, carried through the trees. But her eyes never left the shepherd, who was now surrounded by hands and lights and voices, yet still looked only at her. As they passed beneath the trees, she whispered one more thing. "I won't leave you. I promise." And for the first time, the shepherd made a sound barely audible beneath the wind. A breath, a vow, or perhaps the first echo of trust. The wind howled through the pine trees like a warning. Thick curtains of rain crashed down around Arden, soaking her hair, her shirt, even the fleece lining of her shoes. But she didn't move. She sat curled next to the wounded German shepherd, her knees drawn tight to her chest, her arms wrapped around the dog's shivering body beneath her raincoat. Every now and then, she reached out and laid her hand gently over his ribs just to make sure he was still breathing. The world had narrowed down to this small patch of earth near the creek. Everything else, the path back, the trail leaders, the sound of the school group, had vanished behind the wall of gray. Above her, lightning split the sky in a jagged white scream. Arden flinched, but didn't cry. She leaned closer to the dog, her voice trembling but steady. "You're okay. You're not alone." The shepherd stirred. Barely. His paw flexed in the mud. His body twitched under the soaked raincoat, muscles taut with fever and pain. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he had one. But in that moment, he wasn't just a dog. He was someone. Something broken. Something holding on. So she stayed. Her teeth chattered as the cold seeped into her skin like water into stone. Her fingers were pale and numb, but she kept whispering. About home. About her mom's lullabies. About how she'd always wanted a dog but was never allowed because their apartment was too small and her mom worked too many night shifts. "I'd call you Finn," she said softly. "Like from that book. The brave one. The one who never gave up." As if on cue, Finn lifted his head just slightly. Eyes glazed but aware. Her heart caught in her throat. The rain turned icy, pelting the back of her neck. Thunder cracked again, louder this time. Closer. The creek had risen, its edge now licking dangerously close to where they sat. But Arden didn't budge. Every instinct said to run, to find shelter, but her feet wouldn't move. Her heart was rooted here, next to this creature who should have been dead but wasn't. Not yet. The branches above groaned and swayed. One snapped, falling yards away with a splintering crack. The wind tore at her soaked clothes, and still she whispered, her voice a thread in the storm. "You're not going to die out here," she said, wiping a stream of water from his muzzle. "I won't let you." That was when she heard it. At first, it was just the faintest echo, her name, distorted by distance and wind. Then again, louder. "Arden." She bolted upright. "Here, I'm here." A flashlight beam pierced the downpour. Then another. Bright yellow jackets came rushing through the brush. Teachers, rangers, rescue personnel. Her science teacher, Miss Lorraine, stumbled to a stop at the sight. "Dear God, Arden." Multiple hands reached for her at once. One wrapped a thermal blanket around her. Another checked her for injuries, but she didn't look at them. She pointed at the shepherd, her voice cracked but firm. "He's hurt. Please help him. He didn't bite me. He didn't hurt me. He needs help." One of the rangers crouched beside Finn, examining the makeshift napkin bandage that was soaked with blood and rain. His expression shifted from surprise to urgency. "We've got a live one," he called out. "Looks like an injured K9. Get the mobile stretcher down here now." "Is he going to be okay?" Arden asked, eyes wide. The ranger met her gaze. "We'll do everything we can, sweetheart. But if you hadn't stayed with him, he wouldn't have made it. And Miss Lorraine crouched beside her, rain running in rivulets down her cheeks.
Why didn't you call out sooner? We were terrified.
Arden looked down, suddenly unsure how to explain. How do you tell someone that silence felt safer than sound? That sometimes the only thing keeping you grounded is the heartbeat beside yours? I didn't want to scare him, she said simply. He trusted me. The group began to move. The Rangers lifted Finn onto a stretcher with careful hands, securing him in waterproof wraps. Arden walked beside him as far as they'd let her, her small hand resting briefly on his side before they carried him toward the clearing. For a moment, the night paused. The storm still raged, but inside her, something quiet and solid began to grow. She had found him in the dark, but she wasn't the one who saved him. He had saved her too. The Animal Trauma Center was quiet, almost too clean, smelling faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Finn lay motionless on a padded table in the back unit, hooked up to an IV that fed into the bend of his front leg. His bandages had been replaced by something more professional, tightly wrapped, sterile, monitored by machines that beeped too slowly for Arden's comfort. She sat by the observation window every day after school. A small girl with damp shoes, a stubborn backpack, and a determination that no nurse or technician could shoo away. The first day, she didn't speak at all. The second day, she brought a notebook. Saturday, cross-legged in the waiting room, and sketched the dog from memory, his eyes, his torn ear, the way his ribs showed beneath the coarse fur. The nurses peeked over her shoulder, quietly moved by the detail. On the third day, she brought a folded towel from HomeSoft, pale yellow, smelling faintly of her mother's detergent, and asked if it could be placed in his kennel. The vet hesitated, then nodded. "You can set it by his head," the woman said. "He's still not waking up much, but he might recognize your scent." Arden stepped into the room, moving slowly, like the walls themselves could shatter. Finn was thinner than she remembered. His breathing was shallow, his body strangely still for a dog that once twitched at every thunderclap. She knelt beside him, gently placed the towel next to his face and whispered, "I'm here." The dog's eyes didn't open, but his paw twitched. From behind her, the vet watched. Dr. Riley was in her 50s, gruff on the outside, used to dealing with people who gave up on animals faster than they'd give up on broken appliances. But this girl was different. She wasn't just visiting. She was anchoring something inside herself to the space beside that dog's body. "You know he's a retired canine, right?" Dr. Riley said softly. Scanner pinged an old chip. "He was reported missing nearly a year ago." Arden turned. "Does he have a name?" The vet shook her head. "The records were incomplete. Owner status unknown. He could have belonged to law enforcement. Or military." Arden looked back at the dog. "He has a name now." The vet tilted her head. "Finn," the girl said quietly. "I named him Finn. He's brave." Dr. Riley crossed her arms, studying the girl with something new behind her eyes. "He's still touch and go. Infection. Internal trauma. I won't lie to you, honey. Most people wouldn't bet on him." "I'm not most people," Arden said. She returned every day. She brought books and read aloud next to his kennel adventure stories, fairy tales, even her own science textbook when she had nothing else. Sometimes she didn't speak at all. She just sat, her fingers lightly brushing the towel or his ear, as if keeping him tethered to the world. The staff started calling the dog Finn, too. Day by day, his vitals improved. He opened his eyes briefly on the 6th day, blinked, groggy and disoriented. But when he saw Arden sitting there, something in him stilled like recognition buried deep beneath trauma. By the 10th day, he could sit up. By the 12th, he nudged her hand when she stopped petting him. The connection between them had no words, no logic, but it was undeniable. She had waited in the rain, and now he waited for her too. Dr. Riley watched the transformation with something close to reverence. She didn't say it aloud, but she knew the dog wasn't healing because of medicine alone. He was healing because someone had chosen to see him not as a burden or threat, but as someone worth saving. One afternoon, as Arden helped replace his water bowl, the vet bent down beside her and said, "You saved him, you know." Arden shook her head. We saved each other. Outside, the leaves had started to turn. The storm was long gone. But in the stillness of the shelter room, Something unspoken bloomed between a girl who refused to give up and a dog who, for the first time in a long time, believed he didn't have to fight alone. The house smelled faintly of chamomile and old wood, but ever since Finn came home, there was something else in the air, like the tension before a storm that never arrived. Marina stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, staring out the window as the dog lay curled near the back door. He didn't whine. He didn't bark. Just watched. Always watched. "I said we'd try it, Arden," Marina reminded, her voice carrying that soft sharpness Arden had grown to recognize. "But if there's a single incident, one growl at the mailman or—" "He won't," Arden interrupted quickly, stroking Finn's ear. "He's not like that." Marina looked at them, her daughter crouched beside a massive dog with a long scar down his right side, like someone had taken a blade to him and never said sorry. He was still too thin, still favoring one leg, but his eyes had changed. Alert, focused, listening to sounds even the humans didn't notice. He never begged for food, never jumped on furniture, never chased squirrels, never barked at strangers. If anything, he was precise, deliberate, every movement calculated. When Marina had dropped a pan on the first morning and the sound clanged through the kitchen, Finn didn't flinch. Instead, he had risen like a soldier reporting for duty. That was the first time Marina said it aloud. There's something off about him. But Arden only smiled, because she had seen it too, not something off. Something trained. Something once broken, and now trying to remember how to be whole. Finn didn't respond to normal commands. He didn't sit when told, or come when called by name. But when Arden instinctively clicked her tongue a certain way, or whistled softly, he moved. Not like a pet, but like he was waiting for orders. Sometimes he'd position himself between her and the door, or scan the windows when the wind picked up. "He's like a bodyguard," Arden whispered one night, lying on the floor beside him, "like he knows more than he lets on." That week, she started experimenting. She would raise her hand in certain patterns, testing his reactions. One day, she pointed left with 2-finger sand. Finn moved, silently, to that direction. Another day, she bent her fingers like a claw and he stopped mid-step, frozen like a statue. It was eerie. It was amazing. He only responded to her. Arden felt it in her chest, the weight of something heavy and sacred between them, a bond that had skipped explanation and gone straight to understanding. Meanwhile, Marina watched from a cautious distance. She saw how Arden had started to come alive again, how she laughed more, how she stood taller, like having Finn had given her something even therapy hadn't. But Marina was also a mother, and mothers who've lived through hardship know that sometimes the things that save us come with a price. Late one night, she sat at the edge of her bed, watching as Finn slept at the threshold of Arden's bedroom, facing outward, ears slightly twitching, guarding, protecting, never fully resting, and Marina, for all her rational instincts, couldn't shake the unease. "This isn't just a dog," she whispered to herself. But neither could she take him away not, when Arden looked at him the way she used to look at her father's old photo, the one tucked in her diary, the one she thought no one knew about. So Finn stayed, and every morning he watched the yard before Arden opened the door, and every night he made sure she was asleep before he lay his head down. And day by day, even Marina had to admit whatever he was, before he had chosen now. He had chosen them. It was past midnight when the thunder rolled in low, distant, like a drumbeat from another world. Arden lay curled in bed, her fingers still wrapped around the edge of her sketch pad. The charcoal lines of Finn's face stared back at her, strong, quiet, faithful. But outside, the wind picked up, and a dry branch scraped the roof with an eerie creak. She stirred. Then, a sound, a low, guttural noise. Her heart stilled. She turned. Finn. He wasn't at the door, where he always slept. He was in the corner now, breath ragged, claws twitching against the wooden floor. His legs flailed as if running toward something, or running from it. His chest rose too fast. A low growl rumbled from deep inside him, not at anyone in the room, but from something buried far beneath. "Finn?" Arden whispered, slipping off the bed. "Hey, it's okay. It's just thunder." But the moment her hand reached for his back, he snapped awake, his eyes wild, his body tensed, and then a bark. Loud, sudden, sharp. It cracked through the quiet, like a gunshot. Arden froze. Finn backed into the corner, panting. His eyes darted between the shadows, as if searching for a threat only he could see. Then slowly, his gaze fell on her, and everything in him softened. His ears lowered, his body slumped. He let out a long exhale that sounded like a silent apology. Arden didn't move for a moment. Then she whispered, "It's okay. You're safe here." She sat beside him, knees pulled to her chest. The room was dim, lit only by the soft yellow of her desk lamp. And in that glow, for the first time, she saw them. The scars. Thin, jagged, unnatural. One across his chest, like something had been sliced clean through muscle and left to heal without care. And worse, just below his collar, near the neck, patches of fur thinned out, revealing burns. Not scrapes from the wild, not accidents. Deliberate, cruel. Her hand reached out, trembling slightly. She didn't pet him. She just rested her palm near the scars. Not touching, just close enough so he could feel her warmth. Finn didn't pull away. His breathing slowed. But his eyes, those amber eyes, held something ancient. Something Arden didn't yet have words for. A grief that didn't cry. A pain that had learned how to sit quietly and wait. She leaned back against the wall, beside him. In her silence, Finn's mind stirred. Finn's POV. The hallway was white, too white. Bleach, steel, screams behind doors. He was dragged once. Then again. Voices shouting numbers. He's too reactive, start over. A needle, pain, lights. Then the smell of blood, rubber gloves, and burning fur. Restrain him now. Another bark. Not his. A friend. Gone. And then Arden's voice. Present. Real. Bringing him back. Finn blinked. Arden was humming softly now. A tune from childhood, maybe. Off-key. Gentle. You don't have to tell me, she said quietly. But I see it. I see it all. Finn lowered his head onto her lap. No commands. No orders. Just that old battered soul seeking something human in the dark. For the first time, he closed his eyes not to run, but to rest. And Arden, with her tiny hands on his scarred back, whispered words no one else ever had for him. You're home now. The late autumn sun cast a golden hue over the modest front porch of the Winslow home. Crisp leaves swirled in the wind, brushing against the faded welcome mat as Marina smoothed down her hair, adjusting her blouse for the third time in 5 minutes. Arden, honey, she called gently, voice lifted with a nervous cheer. Can you come outside, please? Arden stepped out with a curious frown, Finn trailing behind her. Always quiet, always watchful. There, standing beside Marina, was a man Arden had never seen before. He looked out of place in their neighborhood-polished shoes that hadn't met mud in months, a dark wool coat that fit too perfectly, and a smile that had the exact right amount of warmth without any real heat behind it. Arden, Marina said, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm. This is Mr. Vexley, Roland. He's been helping with the community outreach program. He heard about our situation and wanted to well offer some kindness. Roland extended a hand toward Arden. You must be the artist, he said with a charming grin. Your mother talks about you nonstop. It's lovely to finally meet the famous Arden. Arden glanced at his hand but didn't take it. Something about the way he looked at her, like he already knew everything. Beside her, Finn remained utterly still, his tail rigid, his posture not aggressive, but alert, focused, protective. Roland's smile didn't falter. He lowered his hand casually and reached behind him to reveal a crisp paper bag. I took a wild guess and picked this out for you, he said. Heard your backpack's been through a war zone. He handed her a beautiful navy blue satchel, sleek, well made, with golden stitching and an embossed compass symbol on the flap. Arden gasped softly. It was the kind of bag she'd only ever seen in catalogs. Never touched. Wow, she breathed. Thank you. It's nothing, Roland said, waving it off. Everyone deserves something sturdy to carry their dreams. And Marina beamed, her shoulders visibly relaxing for the first time in weeks. Isn't he wonderful? she whispered to Arden. He's really helped me with the grant paperwork. Says he knows people in state housing. I think he could help us get back on our feet. But Arden didn't answer. Her eyes had shifted to Finn. The dog hadn't moved. Not 1 inch closer to Roland. In fact, his ears were tilted back slightly now. Not fear but judgment. His body language sharp as a drawn line. His nose twitched, sensing something no human ever could. Roland chuckled, noticing the stare. And you must be the loyal bodyguard. Finn, was it? He knelt slowly, palm open in a gesture of goodwill. Hey there, big guy. Just saying hello. But Finn's response was clear. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood, still as stone, and locked eyes with Roland unblinking. Then, as if timed to Marina's next words, Roland reached out to ruffle Arden's shoulder. Just a light touch. But it was enough. Finn moved. In a single fluid motion, he stepped between them, shoulder-brushing Arden, head slightly lowered, not threatening, but firm. The line was drawn. Roland froze mid-gesture, hands suspended awkwardly in the air. He let out a short laugh, but it was tighter now. Well, I suppose he's earned the right to be cautious, he said, slowly withdrawing his hand. Rescue dogs often have attachments. Understandable. Marina's eyes flicked from Roland to Finn, her brow furrowed. Finn, she scolded lightly. He's a friend. But Finn didn't flinch. He remained exactly where he was between Arden and Roland. Arden glanced down and saw Ith's paws were trembling slightly. Not from fear, from restraint. She gently rested a hand on his back, grounding him. It's okay, boy, Arden whispered. But even she could hear the tremble in her voice, the hollowness. The way the words didn't quite land, not even for her. Because the truth was, it wasn't okay. She'd felt it too. The moment Roland's hand had landed on her shoulder, everything inside her recoiled. Not in panic, not in overt fear, but something deeper. A quiet, instinctive withdrawal, like a flame shrinking from wind. It had happened in an instantis, fingers brushing too long. His thumb lingering as if in thought, and something cold had curled up her spine like frost climbing a window pane. She hadn't even registered it fully until Finn had reacted. The growl had come low, not loud. Controlled. Not a bark. Not even a warning. But a statement. A line drawn. And when Arden had looked down at him, she hadn't seen confusion. She'd seen certainty. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Now, hours later, the house sat in its quiet Sunday rhythm laundry, tumbling in the background. A saucepan simmering on the stove. Marina in the other room scrolling through her phone, but everything felt off-axis. Finn was lying beside the couch, his head on his paws, ears angled slightly back. Not asleep, not resting, just watching. She sat on the floor next to him, cross-legged, letting her fingers trace the edge of his collar. The tag clinked softly with each pass, a rhythmic sound she usually found comforting. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. You remember what you smelled? She murmured, half to herself. He didn't blink, didn't move. But the silence between them said more than any nod ever could. There were things adults didn't believe, things they explained away. He's just reactive, Marina had said. Maybe he's picking up on your tension. Dogs mirror that. Maybe. But dogs didn't snarl at mailmen, or neighbors, or random kids at the park. Not Finn. He saved that growl for one person, and only when he touched Arden. The first time had been 2 months ago. Roland had leaned in to say goodbye after a late dinner. Marina had been fussing with the dishes. Arden had just come back from walking Finn. She'd passed by them in the hallway when Roland reached out and patted her back friendly, she thought, or meant to be. But her stomach had turned, like the pressure of his hand was pressing against more than skin. She'd said nothing, but Finn had stiffened, his ears pinned, and then that same sound low, vibrating through his rib shad, filled the narrow hallway like a warning from the walls themselves. Roland had laughed it off. Guess he's still warming up to me. Marina had looked embarrassed. He's protective, that's all. Right, Arden? Arden habnuldet. Because what else was she supposed to say? That her dog knew what she couldn't put into words? That something about Roland didn't feel safe? She hadn't even been sure herself. Until tonight. She leaned back, her spine pressing into the base of the couch. Finn shifted slightly, and nudged his head into her side, his body still quiet but alert. "I don't want to overreact," she whispered, half apology, half plea. Still, Finn didn't blink. She could almost hear the thought behind his stillness. "You're not." That was the thing about Finn. He didn't question his instincts. He didn't gaslight his own senses or explain away the discomfort of a touch. He just knew. And now, so did Arden. It wasn't just the touches. It was the way Roland's eyes lingered just a second too long when Marina wasn't looking. The way he always called her kiddo, but said it with a slant in his voice that felt more like ownership than affection. The way his smiles never reached his eyes. The way he once stood too close in the laundry room. Nothing happened, but the tension in the air was enough to leave Arden frozen for hours afterward, her hoodie still clutched in her hand, untouched. Finn had been pacing that day, ears high, tail stiff. He didn't settle until long after Roland left. And now Marina wanted to start inviting him over more. Said he was trying. That maybe this could be something. Don't sabotage it, she told Arden earlier, eyes tired. We're allowed to be happy. Happy. Arden wanted that too. But not this. Not when happiness came with an asterisk. Not when it cost her peace. Or worse, Finn. She stood slowly and crossed to the kitchen, filling a glass with water just to have something to do, something to hold. In the reflection of the microwave door, she saw Finn sit up behind her, his eyes trained on her, like he always did. Not hovering, just watching. Always watching. She sipped and whispered, "I don't think she'll believe me." A pause. The house groaned with settling beams. Finn padded into the kitchen, his nails soft against the tile. He sat beside her, closer than usual. Then gently, he pressed his head against her leg. "I know." That night, she waited until the house was silent, Marina asleep, the dishes dry in their rack, the wind outside barely brushing the curtains. She reached for her notebook, the one with the sketches, the lists, the things she wasn't brave enough to say out loud. She opened it to a fresh page. Title, Evidence, asterisk. First growl, hallway, back pat, no previous tension, asterisk. Second growl, laundry room, prolonged contact. Roland blocked exit, asterisk. Third, tonight. Just a hand on the shoulder. She circled the last one, then wrote underneath. What if he's not warning me about danger, but confirming something I already knew? The next morning, Marina found her in the yard with Finn, both sitting quietly near the tree line. "Breakfast," she called. "Pancakes." Arden nodded but didn't move. Marina crossed the lawn and crouched next to her. "Did something happen yesterday?" she asked gently. Arden looked down at Finn, then back at her mom. "Do you trust him?" Marina blinked. "What?" "Finn, do you trust him? I mean, sure, he's a good dog, just... do you trust him more than Roland?" That stopped her. Marina's mouth opened, then closed. "I don't want to choose," she said finally. Arden didn't push. She just stood. "Then I'll choose for you." Back inside, she started packing. Not much, just the essentials. Notebook, leash, the photo of them from the rescue shelter when Finn was still afraid of stairs and she was still afraid of people. They'd come a long way since then. As she zipped her bag, Finn stood at the door, ready, waiting. Arden looked at him. "They'll say we're being dramatic." Finn blinked. She smiled faintly. "Let them." The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the small kitchen, a rare warmth seeping into the corners of the house. Marina moved quickly, wiping her hands on a towel, checking the oven again even though dinner was ready. Her nerves were showing more than she intended. It was the first time Roland Vexley would be sitting at their table. And despite the casual invitation, the air in the house felt anything but casual. Arden sat at the edge of the living room rug, her sketchbook forgotten beside her. She watched as Marina lit the last candle and adjusted the silverware with trembling hands. Finn was already pacing. Not wildly, just patrolling. His movements were press ears up, eyes flicking from window to hallway, hallway to back door. The kind of quiet watchfulness Arden had come to know in him. But tonight, it was more tense, restless. He paused often to sniff the air, as if he could smell something the others couldn't. And then the knock came. 2 firm raps, Marina startled, brushing her hair back quickly before opening the door. "Roland," she greeted, her voice lifting with forced brightness. He stepped in with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of wine. "For the hostess," he said with a grin, placing a kiss just above her cheek. "And for the chef, I hope I'm not overdressed." He wasn't, but the tailored jacket and Italian boots felt jarring in their modest dining room. "Arden," he turned, offering a wink. "I hope you saved me a seat next to the artist." She managed a polite nod, but her eyes were already on Finn. The dog had stopped pacing the moment Roland crossed the threshold. Now he stood at the far end of the hallway, tail low, body stiff, watching. "Relax, Finn," Marina said with a nervous laugh. "It's just dinner." They sat at the table. The candles flickered. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Roland talked about investments, about a new apartment complex going up by the lake, about how he was considering sponsoring Arden's art for a local children's exhibit. Marina clung to every word like a lifeline, sipping her wine with too much eagerness. Arden barely touched her food. Finn hadn't moved from his post. Then came Grace. It had always been a short tradition between Arden and her mom. Just a soft pause before eating a moment to be thankful for what little they had. Marina folded her hands and bowed her head. Arden followed quietly. But as Roland reached across the table to touch Arden's wrist, just a light contact, a gesture of inclusion during the prayer, Finn growled. Low, guttural, from the depths of his chest like something ancient being disturbed. The sound sliced through the quiet like broken glass. Roland froze, his fingers inches from Arden's skin. Finn stood now, his body in the archway, eyes burning with unblinking focus. His tail was still, his legs braced, not in attack posture, but in warning. "Finn!" Marina snapped, eyes wide. "No! That's enough!" She stood abruptly, embarrassment flooding her voice. "I'm so sorry, Roland. He's been unpredictable lately." But Roland only laughed, waving it off as if he'd just been sneezed on by a cat. "No harm done," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes this time. "Old instincts die hard, I suppose. He's just trying to protect his girl." Arden looked at Finn, her chest tightening. His breathing was sharp now, nostrils flaring. He hadn't taken his eyes off Roland for a second. Not once. After dinner, as Marina walked Roland out with another apologetic chuckle, Arden knelt beside Finn in the hallway. She placed a hand on his chest. His heart was pounding. Not wild with fear, but driven. Focused, as if every sense in his body was screaming a truth no one else wanted to hear. And as his gaze remained locked on the closed door behind which Roland Vexley had just disappeared into the night, Arden whispered, "What are you trying to tell me, Finn?" Finn didn't bark, but his ears stayed up long after the house went quiet. The wind had picked up again. It brushed against the windows like fingers trying to get in, rattling the old glass panes with a sound that had always unsettled Arden until Finn arrived. Now, every sound felt different. Not safer, but known. It was just past midnight. Marina had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving Arden alone with her thoughts, and the dog curled at the foot of her bed like a living shadow. But Finn wasn't asleep tonight. He stirred at every creak, every gust, every car far off in the distance. And then he moved. Silently, deliberately, he rose from the rug and walked to the far corner of Arden's room. His paws patted against the wooden floorboards, stopping at a panel near the wall. Arden watched, sitting up slowly. "Finn?" she whispered, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" He didn't respond. Instead, he lowered his nose to the floor and began sniffing intently, then scratching. Slow, deliberate motions at first, as if something under there was calling to him. Not food, not vermin. Something deeper. "Hey, stop," Arden said gently, swinging her legs over the bed. But he didn't. His nails caught the edge of one of the boards, and with a soft, muffled whine, he began digging, not with frenzy, but with purpose. It wasn't just an itch. It was memory. Something buried. Something forgotten. Kneeling beside him, Arden touched the floor. The wood there felt slightly looser than the rest warped by time, or something more. Her heart fluttered. This house had creaks and flaws and stories no one ever wrote down. But this felt intentional. She fetched a ruler from her desk drawer and wedged it under the edge, With a quiet pop, the board lifted. Dust rose into the moonlight. Finn stepped back, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the shadowed hollow beneath. Arden reached in. Her fingers brushed against something cold, metal. She pulled out a rusted dog tag, still strung on a fragment of chain, its surface worn but faintly etched. Then her fingers found something else. A bullet casing. She stared at it under the glow of her desk lamp. Spent, dented at the lip. There was something haunting in the weight of it, like it remembered what it had been part of. War. Death. Silence after the noise. She turned the dog tag over, wiping away the grime with the corner of her sleeve. Numbers. A name partially scratched out. And beneath it, K9 Unit, code 6 to 17X. Mill certified id. O92-114-5AG. Her breath caught. This wasn't a trinket. This was military. She looked at Finn, who now sat beside her again, eyes low, posture still not ashamed, but waiting, as if asking, "Do you understand now?" Arden swallowed. "Is this you?" she whispered, fingers trembling as she held the dog tag toward him. He didn't move, but his eyes stayed on hers with a weight that said yes louder than any bark ever could. Suddenly, her room felt smaller, the air tighter. The memory of his growl at Roland echoed in her ears. This wasn't just a stray she found in the woods. This was a soldier. A dog with a past no one had told her, with scars not just on his body but on the timeline of someone's forgotten mission. And now she had evidence, proof. But of what? She turned the dog tag over again, heart pounding. The numbers felt cold, sterile, government-made, but also like a thread, one that could unravel everything if she pulled hard enough. From beneath the floor, she also spotted a crumpled piece of what looked like black cloth burned at the edge. Arden reached in again, tugging it free. It looked like part of a harness. The letters had long since faded, but she could just make out the imprint of a stitched emblem. Unit. Hollow Shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. That didn't sound like a rescue team. That sounded like something classified. Finn whimpered once, soft and low, pressing his nose against her hand. And in that moment, Arden didn't feel like a child anymore. She felt like someone who had just opened a door that should have stayed locked. The gymnasium of Red Maple Middle was decked out in banners and plastic streamers, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above rows of folding chairs. A sign near the stage read, "Community Heroes Day, honoring those who give back." Arden sat toward the back, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Her class had been rehearsing this event for weeks, but today the room felt tight, wrong, like a pair of shoes that didn't quite fit. Because sitting in the front row, smiling like a polished statue, was Roland Vexley. In his navy blue suit, he looked more like a man stepping off a magazine cover than someone here for a school event. His teeth gleamed when he laughed. His hand rested too comfortably on Marina's shoulder. And even from this far away, Arden could feel Finn's tension. The dog wasn't allowed inside the gym, of course. He was waiting outside with Marina before the event started, and she'd tied his leash to one of the short posts near the front walkway. Arden had kissed his head before heading in. He'd been stiff then, ears forward, tail straight knot, wagging. She thought he was just nervous about the crowd. She didn't know it would get worse. The event began with applause and a few stiff performances. Children read poems. A local firefighter handed out toy helmets. The audience clapped politely. Then Principal Howe stepped to the mic. "Today," she said, "we have a very special guest, a man who's helped fund our new computer lab and started a scholarship program for single mothers returning to school. Please welcome Mr. Roland Vexley." Applause erupted. Arden didn't move. Her stomach turned. She glanced out the side window, where she could just make out Finn's silhouette tied to the post outside. His ears were perked. His whole body pointed toward the gym entrance. And then he growled. It started low, like thunder behind the clouds. But when Roland stepped onto the stage and smiled toward the window, Finn's bark ripped through the air like a siren. Students turned. Parents murmured. And outside, Marina scrambled toward the dog. But it was too late. Finn lunged. The leash pulled taut, and the post wrenched sideways from the force. Marina shrieked. The security guard at the entrance tried to block him, but Finn's bark escalated into full-blown snarling, a sound of protection. of warning, of war. Inside, Roland paused mid-speech. His eyes flickered toward the door, then quickly back to the crowd. "Well," he chuckled, "looks like someone doesn't like my cologne." Polite laughter followed. But Arden wasn't laughing. She knew that sound. That bark. It wasn't misbehavior. It was a response, a reaction to danger. Security restrained Finn. Marina apologized profusely, brushing her hair behind her ear with a trembling hand, red-faced in front of the PTA president. She kept repeating, "He's never done that before, I swear." But no one was listening. Whispers moved through the crowd like fire across dry grass. A dangerous dog? Isn't that the stray her daughter found? Didn't she say he was trained? Principal Howe gave Marina a tight-lipped nod and whispered something about liability. By the time Roland finished his speech, gracious, charming, unflinching, Marina was being asked to remove the dog immediately. Finn didn't resist when Marina led him away. But he kept looking back, his amber eyes locked onto Roland with a glare that burned through the glass and the crowd and everything polite in between. Back home that evening, silence blanketed the dinner table like snowfall. Marina didn't speak much, just scraped her fork against her plate. Arden poked at her peas. "He's not dangerous," she whispered. Marina sighed. "He scared 100 people today, Arden, including me." He was scared, or trying to protect me. "From Roland?" Her mother's voice was sharp now. "The man who bought you school supplies? Helped with the heating bill last winter?" Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that hummed under the surface like a wire about to snap. The clink of silverware against ceramic felt louder than it should have, and even the steady tick of the kitchen clock sounded accusatory. Arden hadn't touched much on her plate. The roasted chicken, glazed carrots, and perfectly spooned mashed potatoes looked like they belonged in a magazine spread, carefully staged, curated for appearance rather than comfort. The scent of rosemary and lemon wafted upward, warm and hollow. She stared down at it. Across from her, Marina chewed with deliberate elegance, her blouse too crisp for a Thursday, makeup still pristine from a meeting earlier, but her eyes flicked too often toward Arden, watching, measuring, waiting for the outburst she thought might come. It didn't. Arden just sat there, shoulders slightly hunched, fingers absently toying with the edge of her napkin. She wasn't planning on saying anything. Not really. But it had been sitting in her throat all day, like a shard of something too sharp to swallow. And then she glanced at Finn. He was lying under the table, his usual spot during meals. His head rested between his front paws, but his eyes were open, watching. Still. Alert in that eerie, quiet way that dogs sometimes are. As if he too was waiting for something. And before she could stop herself, it came out. "The growl wasn't random," Arden said, barely above a whisper. "It's the same every time. Every time Roland touches me." The words landed like broken glass on the hardwood floor. Marina's fork froze mid-air, a small piece of chicken dangling from the prongs. Her expression didn't change at first, still composed, still smooth, but there was a flicker, a blink too long, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. She looked like she wanted to laugh, to dismiss it with a well-practiced smirk and a joke about teenage imagination. But she didn't. The silence stretched. Finally, she set the fork down carefully on the edge of her plate and wiped her mouth with her napkin. A performance. Clean hands. Controlled voice. "I need you to keep him in the laundry room during visits from now on," she said. Her tone was light. Too light. "Just until this blows over." Arden blinked. "Blows over?" "He's sensitive, Arden. He's been through a lot." Arden looked down at Finn. The dog hadn't moved. Not a muscle. His chest rose and fell slowly, his breathing even. But his gaze was locked on her, like he was reading every word unspoken between the lines. And in that moment, she swore he understood. Not just the tone, not just the tension, the meaning, the betrayal, the hurt. She didn't answer. Just let the silence speak for her. That night, the house felt colder. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Arden lay curled on her side in bed, blanket pulled up to her chin. Finn stretched along the floor beside her. Her fingers dangled over the edge, brushing his fur in slow, absent strokes. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant wind against the glass, and the memory of her mother's voice. Just until this blows over. But it wouldn't. Not for her. Not for Finn. Not when her mother had chosen comfort over clarity, reputation over truth. She thought of the growls. There had been 3 of them. Subtle, low in his chest. Each time, exactly when Roland entered the room and put a hand on her shoulder. Once when he ruffled her hair. The last when he tried to guide her by the elbow toward the kitchen. Not snarls, not barks, just a soft, steady warning, like a wire straining under pressure. Like a dog who had seen something before and remembered. Arden sat up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She grabbed the notebook from her backpack and opened it on her lap. The pages were worn at the corners, the ink slightly smeared in spots, as if someone had been crying while writing it. Inside were the names, the red circles, the crossouts, the initials next to phrases like compliant, nonverbal, and sensitive to olfactory trigger. And Finn's name, his original tag number, was there too. But what shook her more was what came after. Reactive only to specific male tones. Memory recall through scent triggers. Possible anomaly. She looked at Finn. "What did he do to you?" she whispered. Finn didn't move, but his tail gave a slow, cautious twitch. Once. Like acknowledgement. Like mourning. The next morning, Marina left early. Arden heard the car door close, the tires on gravel, the soft beep of the security system. The moment the sound disappeared, she moved. She grabbed a flashlight, slipped on her sneakers, and pulled her hoodie over her head. "Come," she said softly. Finn was already at the door. They walked to the side of the house, through the dewy grass, past the wooden gate that hadn't squeaked since Arden oiled it last spring. The trail led down into the wooded patch behind the neighborhood where old runoff creeks twisted between roots and moss, and the air smelled like earth and memory. This was where she came when she needed to think, where she had brought Finn the first time he came home from the shelter, where he had stopped halfway down the hill, nose to the air, and let out the smallest sound, not a bark, not a whine, just a breath that trembled at the edges. And now, as they reached the same bend in the creek bed, he stopped again. Same place, same pause. But this time, he turned and looked at her, right into her. And in that stillness, something passed between them. Not language, not command, but a shared ache, a whisper beneath the skin. "You remember this, don't you?" Arden said. His ears perked. He didn't need to nod. She crouched beside him and rested her forehead gently against his. "I'm not locking you away," she whispered. "Not now. Not ever." That night, Marina returned home with takeout. Thai food, Arden's favorite. As if pad see ew and mango sticky rice could smooth over the fracture in their living room. "I got the sweet kind," Marina said brightly, holding up the bag. The place on 3rd Street finally reopened. Arden sat at the table, hands folded. She didn't reach for the food. Marina frowned. "What?" Arden looked up, calm, clear. "He shouldn't be allowed back in the house." Marina froze. "Excuse me?" Arden's voice didn't rise, but it didn't shake either. "You know something's wrong, even if you don't want to say it." Marina's mouth opened, then closed. Arden, I don't think you understand the consequences." "No," Arden said quietly. "I do." Marina's expression cracked for a second, just a flicker. And for the first time, she looked small. Like a woman who'd been walking a balance beam for too long and finally saw the floor was closer than she thought. But still, she didn't say it. She didn't confirm it. She just whispered, "Please, just give it time." Arden stood, walked to Finn, and knelt beside him. "I already did." The evening was heavy with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and settles over a house like a veil. Crickets chirped in rhythm with the soft hum of porch lights. And somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured a storm undecided, waiting for permission. Arden stood barefoot on the wooden porch, hugging herself in her oversized hoodie. Finn lay at her side, head low, eyes tracking every shadow. He hadn't moved in the last 10 minutes. His muscles coiled beneath his fur like quiet wires waiting to snap. The doorbell rang. Finn stood immediately. Not barked, not growled. Stood still and tall, like a soldier waiting for orders. Marina wasn't home. She had taken the late shift at the diner again. Arden opened the door slowly. There he was, Roland Vexley. Neat, charming, camera-ready, even without an audience. His smile was soft, almost fatherly. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said smoothly, holding up a plain white envelope. Just dropping this off for your mom some papers and a donation check for the community center. She mentioned the fundraiser. Arden nodded. Awkward. She's not home right now. That's okay, he said, already stepping forward. You can just pass this along. Finn emerged into the doorway. No leash, no bark, just a presence. The air changed. Roland's smile faltered only slightly, but Arden saw it. She reached for the envelope, and that's when it happened. Roland moved. Fast. Too fast. His hand, instead of handing the envelope, reached behind her, fingers brushing the small of her back like he was about to push or pull or hold. And then all sound broke open. Finn launched. No warning bark. No hesitation. Just an instinctive blur of fur and muscle and teeth. He hit Roland square in the forearm, jaws locking around his tailored jacket like steel springs. The envelope flew. Roland crashed backward, landing hard on the porch steps, shouting in pain. "Get him off!" Get him off. Blood seeped through torn fabric. His sleeve was shredded, red and soaked. Flesh exposed beneath deep scratches where he had braced against the wooden rail. "Finn!" Arden screamed, grabbing the dog's collar. "Off! Finniff!" And he did. As suddenly as he'd struck, Finn released, but didn't run. He stood between Arden and Roland, his stance wide, head low, teeth bared. His tail didn't wag. His breathing was deep, steady, not panicked, controlled, intentional. From the neighbor's yard, a porch light flicked on. Mrs. Klein yelled something, then screamed when she saw the blood. Sirens weren't far behind. By the time police arrived, Roland was sitting upright, arm wrapped in a kitchen towel, Marina kneeling beside him in horror. "I'm so sorry. He's never done this before. He's usually calm. He's trained." Finn sat silently in the corner, leashed now, unmoving, his amber eyes fixed on Roland like he was still calculating. Arden stood off to the side, shaking, because even as chaos swirled neighbors, flashing lights, the officer scribbling in his notebook, she couldn't ignore what she'd felt when it happened. Finn hadn't attacked out of panic. He hadn't lunged without cause. It was reaction. Reflex. The kind of thing you don't learn at a shelter. The kind of thing embedded deep in your bones. Combat instinct. Protection. The officer turned to her. Did he provoke the dog? Any sudden moves? She hesitated. Looked at Roland, who had gone pale, but quiet, nursing his wound with a pained grimace. Then she looked at Finn and answered quietly, "Yes." That night, the house was tense. Marina hadn't said a word since they returned from urgent care. She just walked past Arden into the kitchen, put ice on her wrists, and leaned over the counter like the weight of everything was finally cracking her spine. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" Arden asked. Marina turned, slow and tired. Her voice was like a worn rope, fraying at the edges. "We could lose him for this!" Arden's heart dropped. "You meant take him away?" Marina didn't answer. Didn't have to. In Arden's room, Finn lay curled by the bed, quiet as always, but she saw Idith's side rising with each slow breath, his body still tense from earlier. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead gently against his. "You were trying to tell me something, weren't you?" she whispered. "And I didn't listen." Finn blinked. Once. Then pressed his nose into her palm. A quiet wait. And in that moment, Arden realized this wasn't just a dog with a past. This was a soldier with unfinished business. The wail of sirens carved through the quiet neighborhood like a blade. Blue and red strobes painted the house in stuttering flash askew. Bright, too loud, for something so intimate, so wrong. Arden sat on the steps, curled inward, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her cheeks were wet, but she wasn't sobbing anymore. She'd gone quiet, that kind of quiet that only happens when you've cried past the point of breath. And beside her, Finn, leashed, still. His fur was damp with blood, not his, but he didn't flinch from it. He sat tall, unmoving, his body alert but composed. The only thing that betrayed him was the slow, tired fall of his tail against the porch floor. Not tucked, not lifted, just low. Officer Delgado knelt in front of her, notepad in hand, voice gentle. "Can you tell me exactly what happened, Arden?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. Because anything she said would become part of a report. And reports don't feel, they don't remember the way Roland's hand moved too fast. Or the way Finn reacted without hesitation like he'd done it before. Not out of fear, but training. Behind her, voices overlapped in static. He came out of nowhere, Roland snapped, holding the towel tighter over his bandaged arm. I was handing her an envelope next thing. I know, the mutt's trying to tear my arm off. You saw it. That dog's a threat. Marina stood a few feet behind him, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching her phone like it might save her. But she hadn't made a single call, hadn't said a single word, just stood, frozen, like everything was happening 10 feet away from her skin. One of the officers motioned toward Finn. We'll need to bring the dog in for a behavioral hold. At least 72 hours while animal control evaluates him. No, Arden said, voice cracking. Delgado lowered his pad. I'm sorry, sweetheart. That's protocol when a dog bites a person especially this severely. Finn didn't do anything wrong, she whispered. Roland turned toward her, tone laced with thin sympathy. I'm sure you think that. But he attacked unprovoked. Finn's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He didn't growl. He didn't look at Roland. He only glanced once toward Arden and held the gaze. Like an apology. Or a promise. Maybe both. The animal control officer stepped forward, muzzle in hand. Arden stood abruptly. Wait. Please don't. That doesn't bite unless he thinks someone's in danger. I know this is hard, the woman said softly. But we have to take every case seriously. You can visit him tomorrow morning at the shelter, okay? Finn didn't resist when they slipped the muzzle over his snout, didn't fight the leash. But his eyes never left Arden. And when they led him down the porch steps, he paused, just for a second, turned his head, and lifted it just slightly. Tail low, head high, dignity even now. That was the last image she had of him that night. Inside the house, Marina finally moved. Poured herself a glass of water, but her hands trembled too hard to lift it. She stared at the sink like it had betrayed her. We could get sued, she whispered. Roland has every right. Arden didn't reply. She walked past her mother, past the broken silence, past the dried blood on the porch floor, and into her room, where the envelope still lay, unopened. She picked it up, staring at the name printed on the corner, Roland Vexley Foundation for Youth Advancement. The paper crinkled under her fingers, and in her chest, something old and quiet began to rise. Not fear, not sadness, doubt, and behind it, slowly, painfully, anger. The kennel air was thick with the scent of bleach, old fur, and despair. Every few seconds, a distant bark pierced the hushum sharp, some broken. But in the back row, where the light barely reached and the dogs didn't bark anymore, one cell held nothing but silence. Arden pressed her hand to the cold glass. Finn didn't move. He sat in the far corner of the small concrete run, still as stone. His ears were lowered, not out of fear, but weariness. His body looked heavier somehow, like the world had folded inward on him. A faint hum came from the overhead light, flickering. Behind Arden, a woman's voice droned quietly at the front desk, asking Marina to sign the temporary surrender paperwork. Each pen stroke sounded like thunder in Arden's ears. Finn's eyes slowly lifted toward her, and that was it. No tail wag, no attempt to stand, no movement at all. Just eyes. That same deep, intelligent amber. The same ones that once held fierce instinct and lightning reflexes now shimmered with something she hadn't seen before. Resignation. Like he knew. Like he'd been through this before. Like trust, once broken, wasn't something that could be patched back together with apologies or visits behind glass. Arden lowered herself to the floor, cross-legged, her fingers never leaving the surface. I'm here, she whispered, voice cracking. I told them you didn't do anything wrong. Finn blinked once. Still no sound. Still no movement. I know you were protecting me, she added, softer now. I know you remember something. Something that I can't see yet. But I believe you. I swear I do. From the lobby, she could hear Marina speaking. Tired, composed, detached. It's just temporary. We'll figure out next steps once the behavior evaluation comes in. Next steps. That's what Marina had called it. Just next steps. As if this were a matter of scheduling. Logistics. Timelines and signatures and clinical reports filed in manila folders. Not the quiet, suffocating end of something sacred. Not the slow dismantling of a bond that had been forged in silence and fear, in moonlit escapes and whispered truths. A bond born not from training or tricks, but from survival, from understanding, from the unspoken. Arden stood by the window, the one overlooking the backyard, the patch of uneven grass where Finn had first chased butterflies despite his limp. The corner by the old maple where he would sit in the rain and stare upward, as if remembering a life he couldn't describe. She pressed her forehead gently against the glass. It was cold, unforgiving, but it grounded her. Her breath fogged a small circle onto the pain, and for a moment, she just watched it fade. "Finn," she whispered. Her voice barely existed. A breath between heartbeats. "Whatever they say, whatever happens next, I believe you." Behind her, Finn stirred. He had been lying still in the living room, not asleep, just waiting, watching, enduring. But now, at the sound of her voice, at the weight in those Wordshe's ears flicked. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted. First his shoulders, then his spine, until his body faced her fully. Still no wag of the tail, still no bark, just a slight tilt of the head. And then, after a long pause, a subtle dip of his chin. Not submission, not fear, recognition. The kind that said, "I hear you." The kind that said, "I'm still here," even if the world was tearing them apart. Earlier that afternoon, the counselor had come. She wore soft sweaters and neutral lipstick and used phrases like early intervention and trauma-informed care. Her tone was gentle but absolute, the kind that made you feel like you were the unreasonable one for feeling devastated. "Separation can help clarify boundaries," she'd said. As if boundaries were the problem. As if a dog like Finn could just be filed under complication. They spoke in euphemisms. "He's had episodes. We don't want to escalate. He may be misreading social signals." Arden had sat through all of it. Frozen. Numb. Only her fingertips moved, rubbing circles into her jeans, pressing crescent moons into her palms. But none of them noticed Finn. They didn't see the way he never looked away from Arden. Didn't see how his body tensed slightly every time the counselor leaned too close. Didn't understand the simple truth that Arden had learned a long time ago. Finn was her mirror. When she couldn't speak, he did. When she felt nothing, he reacted. When her skin crawled under someone's touch, he growled. And when she cried without sound, he rested his head against her ribs and just listened. Now they wanted to take that away, because it made them uncomfortable, because it didn't fit, because some people didn't believe dogs could know, but Arden knew. And so did Finn. She turned away from the window and walked to him. He didn't get up, his body too worn, too burdened, but his eyes never left hers. She knelt slowly, lowering herself until they were eye level. For a second, neither moved. Then she reached out, and he let her cup his face in both hands. His fur was thick beneath her palms, warm and familiar. She felt the scars under his ear, the old tear in the skin above his eyebrow, the slight tremble in his jaw. All the stories no one had asked him to tell. "They're saying you're the problem," she murmured. He blinked. "But they don't know you." A long pause. Then his nose touched her wrist gently, deliberately, like punctuation at the end of a promise. Later, after the house fell into its usual nighttime hush, Arden lay awake. She could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the ceiling, the wind curling through the cracked bathroom window. She could hear Marina's voice echoing in her head. "They're coming tomorrow morning, just for a while. Just until things settle." Settle, that word again. As if anything about this could settle. As if peace came from pretending the cracks in the walls weren't there. Arden sat up in bed. Her throat burned. Her hands felt too empty. She tiptoed down the hall, past the closed doors and dim nightlights, until she reached the living room. Finn was there, lying on his blanket, awake. Of course he was. She crossed the floor and curled beside him, resting her head against his side. His breath was steady, calm. But when she closed her eyes, she felt his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady, unshaken. real. She must have fallen asleep that way, because the next thing she remembered was morning light creeping across the hardwood and the distant sound of tires on gravel. The van. They were here. Marina's voice echoed in the hallway, too cheerful, too tight. Just be calm. He won't even notice the transition if we're gentle. Gentle, like this wasn't a breaking. Arden rose slowly, not bothering to fix her hair or change out of the hoodie she'd slept in. She walked to the front room, where two men in polo shirts were standing beside a woman with a clipboard, smiling. Efficient, like they were picking up a package. Finn stood near the door, body tense but still alert. "You ready, buddy?" one of them said, crouching slightly. Finn didn't move. Arden stepped in front of him. "Number." All heads turned. "Excuse me?" the woman asked, blinking. "I said no. He's not going." Marina appeared behind her, face pale. "Arden, we talked about this. You talked. I didn't agree. But it's temporary. It's for his safety. Yours too." Arden shook her head. "He's not dangerous. He's protective. There's a difference." The room went still. The men looked at each other. Marina took a step forward. "Sweetheart, please, don't." Arden turned to Finn. His eyes were on her, waiting. "You trust me?" she whispered. He blinked once. That was enough. She faced the team at the door. "You want him? You'll have to call the cops, and they'll have to bring a warrant, because I won't let him go just so someone else can sleep better at night." The woman hesitated, flipped through her folder, whispered something to the others. Then, slowly, reluctantly, they left. The door clicked shut behind them. Hours later, Marina still hadn't said a word. She just sat at the kitchen counter, a cup of untouched tea cooling between her fingers. Arden leaned against the back door, Finn sitting beside her like a statue. The silence stretched. Finally, Marina spoke. "He's going to cost you everything, you know." Arden didn't flinch. "No," she said softly. "He's the only thing that hasn't cost me something." She reached down and ran her hand along Finn's back. "He's what saved me from being invisible." Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rustled across the yard. And for a moment, Marina looked different. Not angry, not cold, just tired. She looked at the dog. Really looked. And saw, maybe for the first time, what Arden had seen all along. A protector, a witness, a survivor. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the weight of a storm remembered. Arden crouched behind the chain-link fence at the side of the holding center, her breath fogging in the chilled night. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears as she waited for the security light to sweep past, then slipped through the loose panel she'd noticed weeks ago. She was smaller than they thought, quieter than they expected, and more determined than anyone ever gave her credit for. She needed to see him, just once, even if he wouldn't come to the glass, even if his silence hurt more than any goodbye. The back corridor was dim. The tiles squeaked faintly beneath her sneakers. Each cage she passed echoed with subtle movement-shifting paws, restless sighs, the occasional whimper from some dog that hadn't yet forgotten hope. But Finn's run was empty, completely. No silhouette in the corner. No weight pressing against the steel. Just the faintest imprint where his body used to rest, and Arden's breath caught. His blanket, folded, not tossed into the corner, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. That wasn't how she remembered it. The last time she saw him, it had been tangled beneath his paws. He didn't strike her as the kind to tidy up after heartbreak. She stepped into the enclosure, heart hammering. The moment her fingers touched the fabric, a wave of scent, rose dust, faint antiseptic, and something older, familiar. She knelt, lifting the corner. Something small and metallic clinked against the floor. Arden blinked. A button. Not just any button. It was round, heavy for its size, dull gold. In the center, the crest of an eagle, wings outstretched clutching arrows in its talons. Military, ornate, and unmistakably deliberate. It hadn't fallen off a jacket by accident. Someone had tucked it there, hidden it for Harrer for someone. Her fingers traced the ridges of the crest. It wasn't just military, it was governmental. A high-ranking emblem, secretive, old world. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen it before. Not in a museum, not on television, at home. On the inside of Roland Vexley's coat, She remembered the night he helped Marina carry groceries inside, unbuttoning that expensive, tailored coat in the kitchen, how it flashed for just a moment when he reached for the wine. This was the same. Exactly the same. Her stomach turned. Suddenly, the shadows felt heavier. The silence louder. She clutched the button tightly, heart racing. This wasn't just a clue. It was a threat, and someone had buried it beneath a dog's blanket, hoping it would stay hidden. But Finn had made sure it didn't. He wasn't just a dog who growled at strangers. He was a witness. And someone didn't want that truth getting out. Arden tucked the button into her coat pocket and backed away from the empty run. One last glance at the hollow space where loyalty used to live. She didn't cry this time. She burned. The attic was cold. Dust clung to Arden's sleeves as she pushed aside a cracked box labeled Nursing 2003 in her mother's careful handwriting. It smelled like old paper, mothballs, and a time no one talked about anymore. She shouldn't be up here. But nothing about the last week had felt normal. Not since Finn was taken. Not since that button slipped from the folds of his blanket like a forgotten ghost. That gold Eaglite had haunted her all night. Not just because of Roland, because she'd seen it before. And if memory was a foggy mirror, then this attic was a match lit in the dark. She pried the box open with trembling fingers. Inside, faded binders, loose papers, sticky. Notes long since yellowed. Her mother's student life, frozen in ink. She flipped through them quickly, scanning for something, anything. And then there, a folder, creased at the corners. The front page was stamped with a logo, Northspire Medical Ethics Symposium. A crest sat in the upper right corner, the same eagle. Bold, sharp, unsettlingly similar to the button hidden in her coat pocket. Arden's pulse kicked. She opened the folder. Inside were stapled documents, case studies, lecture notes, and one printed research abstract highlighted in neat yellow lines. Neurological Intervention in Pediatric Behavioral Outliers. Trial sponsored by Helix Foundation for Advanced Neurology. Chair R. Vexley. There it was, plain, buried in academic language and polite detachment, but clear as glass. Her breath caught as she read. Children with aggressive cognitive response triggers, test groups, side effects, memory patterning, behavior suppression, canine-based proximity pairing models. Phase 1. She didn't even understand half of it, but the words pressed down like a weight she couldn't shake. And her mom had highlighted it. All of it. She flipped the page. There was a note scribbled at the bottom. This doesn't feel right. Funding looks buried in defense allocations. Follow up? Her mom had questioned it. Years ago. Before she ever met Roland. Before he became the generous benefactor. Before he gave Arden a new school bag with a smile Finn didn't trust. The box creaked beneath her knees. Arden stared down at the paper, her heart caught between two timeline zones where her mother was just a tired nurse trying to graduate, and one where she might have stumbled too close to something bigger. Something that had names erased, dogs discarded, and children hurt. And Finn? Maybe he wasn't the only one with scars that didn't bleed anymore. Her fingers tightened on the folder. The button in her pocket felt heavier now. It wasn't just a warning. It was a key. The old microfilm reader hummed like a tired ghost, casting a soft glow over Arden's face. The library was nearly empty, just her and a librarian asleep behind a stack of returned books. Outside, dusk was falling, streaking the sky in shades of bruise and flame. She leaned closer. The screen flickered as she turned the dial. Another article slid into view dated July 2009. Local shelter fire kills 3 canines. Arson suspected, no arrests made. Arden's eyes narrowed. The article was short, strangely so. A few paragraphs, barely mentioning the shelter's prior involvement in contracted animal behavior testing. There was no follow-up story. No named suspects, just a black and white photo of ashes and fencing. She jotted it down. The headline before that had been stranger. Donation to defunct medical trial sparks protest. We never agreed to this, says parent of participant. It was the same company, the same funding source. And again, Roland Vexley listed as philanthropic contributor. His name appeared like an ink stain no one could scrub out. She pulled the school notebook from her bag, the one with a sticker of a fox and peeling corners. It had started as a doodle pad. Now it was filled with newspaper names, dates, company webs, hand-drawn timelines, pages of what no one else seemed to notice or wanted to. She pressed harder as she wrote, "Why dogs? Why children? What connects them?" The microfilm buzzed again. She reached for the dial. "Arden!" The voice snapped like a whip. She turned. Her mother stood at the far end of the room, hands on hips, lips drawn tight. "Mom," she said, startled. "How did you?" "Don't mom me," Marina hissed, marching over. "I had a patient mention seeing you here every afternoon. I thought you were—" Her voice dropped when she saw the newspaper reel. She stared at the screen, then at the notebook. Her face darkened. "What is this?" "It's research," Arden mumbled, suddenly ashamed and defiant at once. "I was just trying to understand why he reacted the way he did. And I think Roland—" "Enough," Marina snapped, louder than she meant to. "This is insane. You're chasing ghosts. I told you he was trying to help us." "By lying? By hiding things?" "Arden, you're a child. You don't know how these things work. You think you're uncovering some great conspiracy, but you're just scared and hurt. That dog attacked someone, and you're trying to make sense of it the only way a child can be, making villains." "But he wasn't wrong," Arden whispered. "You saw it, Mom. You felt it." Marina faltered, but only for a second. Her hand lingered near the edge of the counter, as if steadying herself against something she couldn't quite name. Then her shoulders squared, her eyes hardening like a pane of frosted glass. She looked away, jaw clenched. "We're done here," she said quietly, almost too evenly. "Go home. Now." Her voice didn't rise, but it cut like sleet across Arden's skin. Cold, final, absolute. Then Marina turned. Her heels clicked once on the tile before her footsteps dissolved into the hallway, swallowed by the hush of a house that was no longer a home. The door to her office clicked shut behind her. No slamming, just a quiet, surgical separation. Like a closing file, like erasing a truth, Arden sat frozen, not from fear, but from clarity. For weeks, she had prayed her mother would see it, that someone would read the signs, the inconsistencies, the chilling calm in Roland's voice whenever he explained something that didn't quite add up. Arden had waited for Marina to look past the framed certificates, the manicured smiles, the good deeds, and Sunday donations. But that second, that single moment of hesitation in Marina's eyes was all Arden needed to understand. Her mother had seen something and chosen not to look again. Not because she didn't care, but because caring would crack the glass she stood on. Arden inhaled slowly, the air thick in her lungs like syrup. Her hands, still resting on the edges of the open notebook, trembled not with fear, but with decision. She could still smell faint lavender from her mother's perfume clinging to the room, layered over antiseptic and wood polish. Familiar scents, but now they stung. She slipped the notebook back into her backpack with the reverence of someone sealing a sacred text. It made a soft shift sound as it slid between her math folder and the spiral-bound journal she hadn't dared write in for weeks. Then the zipper closed. It was a quiet sound, small, but in her heart, it echoed like a vow. If no one else was going to connect the dots, she would. If the adults kept turning their faces toward comfort and away from shadows, she would face the dark head-on. She would dig. She would follow every thread until they tangled at the feet of truth, even if it meant standing alone, especially if it meant that. And if Finn had been the first to sense danger, she would be the second. Later that evening, the house was silent. Dinner was made, but untouched. Marina had left a plate on the table roast chicken, steamed carrots, mashed potatoes, arranged too perfectly. Arden stared at it, not because she was hungry, but because the arrangement looked like a photograph from a parenting magazine. Intentional, performed. She pushed the plate aside. Finn lay nearby, eyes half closed, but not asleep. His ears twitched at every creak of the floorboards, every shift in her chair. And when her hand moved toward her backpack again, he lifted his head, not fast, not startled, just present, watchful. She met his gaze, That same gaze that had stared into Roland with more certainty than anyone in town seemed capable of. "Do you think I'm crazy too?" she whispered, voice dry. Finn didn't blink. He just laid his head on his front paws again, but his tail gave a slow, steady thump. Once. It was enough. Back in her room, Arden laid the notebook on her bed. Not the kind of notebook used for school, with grids and spelling lists. This was something different, leather-bound, slightly warped at the spine. The ink on the first page had bled through slightly like someone had written in anger or panic. Her fingers hesitated before opening it again. Arden remembered the first time she'd found etwedged behind a false back in Roland's home office drawer. She hadn't meant to be nosy. She had been looking for batteries. But the moment her hand touched the edge of that notebook, coldness had run through her veins like winter water. Inside, entries, lists, pseudonyms, names with red ink beside them, some crossed out, some circled. She remembered the name of a girl who used to go to their school, one of the scholarship kids. Arden hadn't seen her in months. Marina had said she moved, so had the teachers, but now Arden wasn't sure they believed it either. Halfway through the pages was something that still turned her stomach Polaroids of buildings, rooms, and what looked like a fenced medical facility. No logos, no signs, just sterile white walls and a strange symbol, a hexagon, shaped like a cage with light leaking out. And then there were the pages that weren't written in code at all, just raw, manic confessions. Some of them remember more than they're supposed to. The tests hold only if fear is present. Dogs are unreliable indicators unless bonded before trauma. That last sentence haunted her. She remembered how Finn growled the moment he saw Roland. He hadn't been provoked, hadn't been trained, but something deep inside him reacted like a fire alarm to smoke. And what if Finn wasn't just sensing something? What if he remembered? The next morning, Arden skipped school. She didn't leave a note. Marina wouldn't look for one anyway. Instead, she borrowed one of her mother's old trench coats and packed a granola bar, a flashlight, a power bank, and a USB drive into her backpack alongside the notebook. Finn followed without command. They walked 4 miles across town to the edge of the industrial zone where the fake warehouse Roland always said was for supply logistics stood like a gray monolith behind chain-link fences. It was quiet. Too quiet. Arden took out her phone and snapped a picture of the address, of the fence, of a logo on a truck that matched one from the notebook. Finn sniffed the ground, then the air. His body stiffened. He growled, not the same kind of growl she'd heard before, not angry, not reactive. This one was low, almost mournful, like the sound of memory surfacing from somewhere buried deep. She turned to him. "You've been here before," she said softly. Not a question, a recognition. Finn looked at her, then turned toward the fence. For a moment, they stood in silence, girl and dog, both weathered by truths no child or creature should have to hold. Then she whispered, "Let's go find the rest." That night, under the dim light of her bedside lamp, Arden plugged the USB into her laptop and began typing. Every detail, every timeline, every inconsistency in Roland's explanations. Every whisper from kids who'd left the program and never returned. Every article June had ever sent her. Every strange donation. Every redacted report. She wrote until her eyes burned. Finn lay curled at her feet, breathing steady. His presence was like a heartbeat she could lean against, the anchor in a storm. As dawn painted the horizon in soft blues and bruised purples, Arden closed her laptop and whispered to the room, to the silence, to the world that still refused to look. "If no one believes us, we'll make them see." And for the first time, she didn't feel small anymore. The waiting room at the precinct buzzed with low voices and the clicking of keyboards. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a quiet warning. Arden sat hunched forward on the edge of a plastic chair, thumbs pressed tight into her palms to stop them from shaking. Finn's leash had been removed the last time she saw him. His eyes hadn't. She scanned the hallway again. Then she saw her, Officer June Tavares. Her walk was steady, but there was a limp she masked with precision. Her uniform, while crisp, was slightly different. No sidearm, no canine patch anymore. But Arden remembered the way she'd knelt down that night, after the chaos, when everyone else shouted and snapped orders. June had simply whispered, "It's okay, boy." And Finn had stopped shaking. Just like that. "Miss Rivera?" June's voice broke through. "Arden Stutt." They didn't talk there. June led her outside through a staff exit and into the small courtyard behind the station. Brick walls, a bench, a trash can. The sun was low, catching the threads of silver in June's short-cropped hair. "You said you had something to ask me," June said, calm, folding her arms. Arden looked down at her notebook, now creased and full of half-finished thoughts. She swallowed. I don't think what happened was Finn's fault." June's gaze softened. She waited. "There's something wrong with Roland Vexley," Arden said quieter. "I know you probably can't do anything Booth scares Finn. And Finn doesn't scare easy. He saved me. He's always known things. And I think he knew something that day." June exhaled slowly and sat on the bench. "You know, when I worked with dogs, I had a partner, Miko, Belgian Malinois, smartest soul I ever met. He took a knife for me." Arda blinked. June patted her thigh absently, like the dog was still there. "It changes you, working with them. Makes you listen differently. To silence, to stares, to tail twitches. We train them to follow our commands, but the truth is, they train us to see." Arden sat beside her, notebook forgotten. "I looked into Finn's file after the attack," June said. "He doesn't have a chip. That's unusual. No vaccination records either, not even a vet registry." Arden's breath caught. I asked around. "There are scars on him, military kind. Controlled burns, pressure wounds, stuff no shelter dog should have." She turned to face Arden. "Where did your mom find him?" Arden hesitated. "He just showed up during a storm. I think he was following something or someone." June nodded. "I believe you." Those 3 words cracked something wide open inside the girl. "I knew there was something wrong the minute Vexley stepped into that holding room," June continued. "He didn't ask about the bite. He asked where the dog came from. He asked if Finn had ever been on a base." Arden's stomach dropped. "Roland served?" she whispered. "No," June said, and her tone grew tighter. "But he funded things that did." They sat in silence, the wind turning cooler now. June reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a small plastic ID sleeve. Inside was a photo. Her and Miko, side by side. Miko wore goggles and a vest with a single word stitched in white. Reclaimed. That program was shut down years ago, quietly. Most of the dogs were euthanized. Some escaped. Her eyes met Arden's. "If Finn is one of them, he wasn't supposed to live." A tremor went through Arden, not of fear, but of clarity. "So what do I do?" June stood. "You write it all down," she said. "You keep it safe, and you wait for the moment when someone finally listens. Until then, trust your dog. He hasn't failed you yet." Arden watched as June walked back through the staff door, the limp more visible now in the fading light. For the first time in days, Arden didn't feel crazy. She felt armed with truth, and with something more dangerous. Belief. It was almost dark by the time Arden made it back to the precinct. The plastic bag in her backpack crinkled with each hurried step inside, wrapped in an old sock, was the rusted dog tag she and Finn had unearthed from beneath the floorboards weeks ago. She hadn't told Marina. Not yet. Not until someone else believed her. And Officer June Tavares had said 3 words that changed everything. "I believe you." A buzzer sounded as June unlocked the back gate. She nodded for Arden to follow. "Come quick. We don't have much time," June said, leading her through a side entrance down a hallway that smelled faintly of dust and coffee filters and into a small records office. A single lamp glowed over a cluttered desk. June sat down at the terminal. "You brought it?" she asked. Arden unwrapped the sock gently, revealing the metal tag. Its surface was worn, but the stamped numbers were still visible, dulled only by time and silence. June squinted. D-17. That's a tactical designation, not a shelter registry. She clicked rapidly through a secure system, logging into something beyond public access. "Hold on. It's asking for cross-auth." She inserted a chipped ID card into a reader. The screen blinked, then loaded a black and white interface with green text. The air felt denser. Arden's heart beat in her throat. June typed again. We used to track military-adjacent K-9 units, especially ones involved in federal ops or domestic surveillance under medical trials. Arden's hands tightened around her knees. Finn wasn't just a pet, was he? No, June whispered. He wasn't. The screen flashed. K-9, D-17. Status: Maya. June leaned forward. D-17. Handler, redacted. Last assignment: off the books. Pharmaceutical sting in conjunction with Project Ocellus. What's Project Ocellus? Arden asked. June didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the rest of the line. Operative notes. Final up terminated. 4 agents compromised. 1 K-9 presumed dead. Subject D, 17 missing. Tagged as burned asset. She slowly turned toward Arden. Your dog was not just trained. He was deployed. The words felt like thunder. Arden stared at the tag in her palm, suddenly heavier, as if the metal carried not just history, but trauma. But why would he end up here, with us? June exhaled, almost like a growl. Because dogs don't forget, not like we do. If he ran, it's because he remembered something that made him dangerous to someone. And his 3. And you said Roland was a primary funder of Pharmaterra. Yes. And according to this, she tapped the screen again, Ocellus was a joint venture between Pharmaterra and a federal contractor that used unapproved neurological agents on humans and dogs. Arden's stomach twisted. And the kids? The school trials? My mom's folder? They weren't separate. They were all connected. June finished grimly. Different branches of the same poison tree. End. Arden stood frozen in place, winded by revelation. He was trying to protect me from the beginning, she whispered. Finn knew. June nodded slowly. Dogs like him are wired for 2 things, memory and mission, and he's still on it. The room grew still. Arden looked down again at the tag, her reflection dimly mirrored in its scratched surface. It didn't shine like it once had, but it still spoke. It carried a truth too long buried. A dog declared lost, a program declared non-existent, and a girl finally listening. It was nearly midnight when Officer June Tavares called Arden back. The ringtone barely buzzed before Arden snatched her phone off the windowsill. Her breath caught in her chest. She answered without a word. I ran the name, June said quietly. Roland M. Kavanaugh. Arden's fingers gripped the curtain. And? A pause. Then the voice on the other end turned cold. He's not who he says he is. Arden sat down on the edge of her bed, her legs suddenly weak. What do you mean? June's voice lowered, as if someone might be listening. He shows up in 4 internal reports tied to the Department of Medical Ethics, all dated between 2007 and 2010, all surrounding cases of experimental neuropharma trials. Every name was redacted except one, Advisor R.C. That could be anyone, Arden said, but her voice trembled even as she said it. June didn't argue. Then why did his name trigger an access delay when I searched it through the off-grid registry for defunct federal contractors? The system stalled for almost 2 minutes, like it had to reroute clearance. She tapped something on her end. Arden could hear faint clicking. I pulled one more file from a congressional hearing that never made it to the press. It's buried in an archived roll call. The name Roland Kavanaugh appears under private sponsor for special acquisition programs the same year Project Ocellus was shut down, the very same year your dog Finn was marked MIA. Arden's mouth went dry. So he was funding it. All of it. June hesitated, then continued, her voice even lower now. They sealed his records. Too clean. Too quiet. You don't erase someone like that unless there's a reason. Arden's mind reeled back Roland's smile at the dinner table, his hand brushing too close during grace. The moment Finn growled for the first time, not out of fear, but instinct, June's voice cracked through her thoughts. Your dog. Your dog wasn't reacting to nothing, Arden. He remembered. He recognized him. Finn wasn't protecting you from a stranger. He was chasing someone from before. A cold shiver ran down Arden's spine. Outside her window, the night pressed against the glass, thick and unmoving. Somewhere out there, Finn lay behind locked doors and cold steel, muzzled, Not because he was dangerous, but because he had come too close to the truth. Arden whispered, "What do we do now?" "We get proof," June said. "Real proof. Not just reports, not just speculation. We need something they can't erase, something they can't redact." Arden nodded slowly, as if June could see her. Her eyes fell to her notebook on the Badits pages, scrawled with names, symbols, newspaper clippings, and at the center of it all, the photo of Finn, sitting tall beside her old drawing of the eagle crest. The pieces were no longer just fragments. They were beginning to align. The library's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above Arden as she flipped another brittle page, fingers trembling. Stacks of dusty newspapers, photocopied trial records, and hand-scrawled notes spilled across the table like puzzle pieces pulled from a dark attic no one wanted to revisit. At the center was one column, a 2009 medical journal entry titled Early Neurological Trials in Pediatric Anxiety Response. It was signed by a consortium. Among the sponsors, R. Kavanaugh, private benefactor. Her highlighter dragged a glowing yellow streak beneath his name. It was the third time that signature appeared across different programs, all within 3 years, all involving children under 12. She grabbed the list of participants' dozens of children's names. Most were first names only, and most ended with a simple one-word status: withdrawn. But one line near the bottom gave her pause. Tyler B., age 7, unresponsive post-week 3, transfer, external care. She pulled out a second folder, a newspaper clipping from the same year. The photo showed a boy with sandy hair and tired eyes. The caption read, "Local boy Tyler Baines goes missing after visit to regional clinic. Authorities say the case has gone cold." Same name, same year, same town. Arden's heart pounded. It wasn't just a coincidence. She opened her notebook and began to draw a simple line graph. Each dot represented a child who had been in the trials. Over half marked in red were later reported missing, institutionalized, or declared wards of the state. The details varied, but the pattern did not. Children disappeared, and Roland's name was on every funding line. Arden swallowed hard. She shoved the papers into her backpack and raced her bike across town, wind clawing at her face as the sun dipped low behind the hills. She didn't stop until she reached the precinct. June was waiting near the back entrance, sipping from a chipped coffee mug. "I found something," Arden said, breathless. "Too much to explain here." June motioned her inside. 10 minutes later, the cluttered break room smelled like burnt coffee and adrenaline. Arden spread out the papers across the table, her map of vanished lives, trial summaries, redacted pages and all. She pointed to the connection between the drug studies, the transfer centers, and the names. They called it external care, but they never said where. These kids didn't just vanish. They were rerouted, systematically, almost surgically. June scanned the sheets, her jaw tightening with every line. "I need to access the Child Protective Services files," she muttered. "Most of this should have triggered reviews, internal investigations, but there's nothing." "They scrubbed it," Arden said softly. The officer met her gaze. "You think he's still doing it?" Arden didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out the last photo. A school group shot taken just 2 months ago at a community fundraiser. Standing at the far end, half shaded by a tree, was Roland Kavanaugh. His hand rested on the shoulder of a boy no one had named in the caption. A boy with dull eyes and a wristband peeking beneath his sleeve. Arden's voice cracked. "I think it never stopped." The room went quiet, except for the hum of an old refrigerator and the sound of June's fingers tightening around the file. When she finally spoke, her voice was steel. "Then it's time we found out where those children went. And we bring your dog home. Because I think he knew all along." June Tavares didn't usually knock twice, but the door in front of her looked like it hadn't been opened in months. The paint was peeling. A single wind chime swayed in the still air, clinking with a hollow, almost hesitant tone. She knocked again. This time, someone stirred behind the curtain. The door creaked open to reveal a gaunt woman in her 60s. Wisps of gray hair framed eyes that had long forgotten how to trust. "Miss Holloway?" June asked gently. "I'm Officer Tavares. I was hoping to speak with you about your niece, Emily Holloway." A beat, Then the woman's face hard, with years of silence cracked at the edges. "I told them everything," she whispered. "Back then, no one listened. I'm listening now." She hesitated, then opened the door wide enough for June to step through. The house smelled like lemon balm and old paper. Time seemed to stall inside. They sat at a cluttered kitchen table. On it, a single frame faced the window. Emily, age 9. Pigtails, gap-toothed smile, a red balloon in one hand. "She was bright," Miss Holloway murmured. "Gifted. They said she'd been chosen for a health scholarship. Some new anxiety treatment for kids who were too smart for their own good. Sounded official. We were told it was safe." June listened, without interrupting. She stopped writing after the 3rd week. When I pressed for information, they said she'd been moved to a recovery facility for adverse reactions. But no address, no phone, nothing. Silence hung heavy. Then Miss Holloway stood, walked to an old cabinet, and retrieved a worn folder. Inside was a child's drawing, faded but unmistakable. Crayons had sketched a figure of a little girl crouching behind what looked like a massive German shepherd. The dog's eyes were wild, with streaks of orange and red almost too vivid for crayon. In the corner, the child had scrawled a phrase in uneven letters. He growled so loud the bad man dropped the needle. June's throat caught. "You showed this to the investigators?" "I showed it to everyone," the woman replied bitterly. "They called it imagination. Trauma response. Said she'd seen too many cartoons." She stared at the paper, fingers trembling. "But Emily said his name. Said it in her sleep the night before she disappeared." June leaned in, heart hammering. "What name?" Miss Holloway looked up, eyes shining. "Finn." June's pulse surged. "She said Finn?" "She said he was the only one who saw the truth, that he came from the shadows when no one else did." The words lodged like a splinter. June stood slowly, gripping the copy of the drawing. "I believe you, and I think it's time people started listening." At the door, Miss Holloway paused. "Do you think she's still out there?" "I don't know," June replied quietly. "But I think Finn remembers. And if anyone can lead us back to Hare, it's him." The house was quieterly so. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, but hums with tension beneath the surface. Marina had come home early from her shift at the clinic, her head pounding from another restless night. Arden wasn't home. A note scribbled on the fridge read, "Library. Be back before dinner." She went to her daughter's room to collect laundry. The usual teenage clutter greeted her open sketchbooks, a half-finished model of a wolf in clay, socks on the windowsill for some reason. Then her eyes fell on the notebook. Not a school one. It was black, bound in worn leather, and shoved beneath the pillow like a secret. She wouldn't have opened, it wouldn't have prediff, not for what had happened that week. The attack, the shelter visit, the way Arden had looked at Finn like he was something holy, like he hadn't bitten a man, like he was trying to speak. Marina hesitated. Then she lifted the notebook and flipped it open. What she saw made her chest tighten. Names. Dozens of them. Each written with neat, deliberate care. Notes beneath. Ages. Timelines. Symptoms. Drawn connections. Questions. The same crest the eagle sketched over and over. Circled in red. Underlined phrases. Missing after trial. Not a stray. Same dog? Thin an entire page labeled Roland, and under it, asterisk. Chaired board for pharmaceutical trial. 1,997. 2001. Asterisk. Discrepancies in donation records. Untraceable scholarship children. Asterisk. Last seen near Emily Holloway's foster home. Marina's hand covered her mouth. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. For a long time, she didn't move. Her mind raced not just from the contents, but from the echoes they stirred, things she had dismissed. The way Roland always deflected when she asked about his early medical work, how he'd once called Finn familiar under his breath when he thought no one heard, the strange moment after the school event when his voice so polished in public had snapped like a whip behind closed doors, and that smell on his sleeve the night of the bite. Bleach. Marina felt something shift inside her, like waking up mid-dream to realize the house is on fire. She stood and carried the notebook downstairs, set it on the kitchen counter, fingers still resting on its cover. Her gaze drifted to the drawer where she kept old mail. Roland's donation letters were still there. Thick envelopes with vague signatures and impossibly generic addresses. She yanked the drawer open. 15 minutes later, her kitchen was buried under clippings, envelopes, yellowed school newsletters, a folder from the Ardenwood Medical Volunteer Program, Roland's program, and in it, tucked between press releases and fake thank you cards, was a newsletter photo she had never truly noticed. It showed a group of smiling kids. Roland at the center, Marina herself was off to the side, awkward in a lab coat. But what made her blood freeze was the dog at Roland's heel black and tan, regal, poised. A German shepherd with a white scar streaking above the eye. Finn, not a dog. Him, years younger, but the same soul in those eyes. Marina staggered backward, heart slamming against her ribs. She hadn't imagined it, and neither had her daughter. It started with a USB drive tucked into an envelope labeled only D17 internal. June Tavares stared at the glowing computer screen in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of printouts and post-it notes. Her arm was still stiff from the scar tissue, a quiet souvenir of the day she lost her canine partner. But tonight, the pain was eclipsed by fury. She had accessed the internal police archives using her old clearance, just enough to unlock the Declassified Closed Cases tab. Case, Operation Delta Flame, CNEO Unit, Jutton. Status, missing in action, presumed dead, but the handler's notes were redacted. The timestamp of the operation matched the day Finn, then labeled D17, was last seen in the field, assigned to an undercover sting involving experimental pharmacology transport. No details, no suspects. But there was one name in the unredacted memo. R.R. Calder, Civilian Liaison, Roland. June's pulse kicked up. She clicked deeper. Bypassing firewall prompts, hidden beneath the sting case, was an attached internal warning. Do not pursue. External liability risk. She leaned back, jaw tight. Liability, she whispered. You mean fallout. Then came the trail of companies Arden had been right. One pharmaceutical parent company, 5 shell corporations branching off it, all tied to dummy LLCs with clean-scrubbed websites and executives listed as aliases. But one name floated to the top, again and again. Eaglecrest Holdings. It was the same crest Arden had traced in her notebook, the eagle clutching a staff and torch. The same crest on the old button Finn had carried back under his blanket. The same one stamped on a research paper funded under Child Neuroadaptive Therapy Trials. Her printer hissed out a dozen sheets at once: tax records, donation forms, an abandoned lab registry in the outskirts of Norhurst. The lab had received grants for post-incident pharmacological evaluations. Another document revealed security contracts authorized to remove non-human evidence in emergencies. In red ink, June circled the signature at the bottom of the funding approval form. Roland Calder, Chair of Public-Private Liaison Board, 2003-2009. She picked up the folder labeled Finn and opened to the scanned page from his canine file. On the margins was the last recorded behavioral notation, likely written by a field handler. Shows unprompted targeting behavior when in presence of subject. RC maintains rigid post, alert posture, no command required. Possible imprinting or chemical trace memory. Needs further observation. No one ever did the follow-up. They just declared him unstable and lost. Now she knew why Finn had launched at Roland without warning. It wasn't an accident. It was memory. June gathered the files: Finn's behavioral logs, the sting operation records, the redacted contracts, the money trail, and the cross-checked list of children who vanished after receiving scholarships. Some of them matched the names Arden had compiled. She added one last page. A digital enhancement of the child's drawing Arden had shown Hearth dog with fire in his eyes. It was crude, but there was something unmistakable in the posture. It was Finn. She clipped the stack together. Not yet for court, not yet for internal affairs, but enough for exposure. She picked up her phone and texted Arden just 3 words. It's all real. Then she grabbed her badge from the shelf, dusty, unused, but not forgotten, and slipped the folder into her messenger bag. The past hadn't just resurfaced. It was about to be weaponized. The school fair looked exactly as it should: balloons dancing under the breeze, paper lanterns strung across the lawn, children laughing as they chased each other past the dunk tank and the cotton candy booth. But beneath the cheerful noise was a current of tension so taut it buzzed. Marina stood beneath the shade of a sycamore, her hands clasped around the strap of her purse like it was a lifeline. Her dress was soft blue, the same color she wore the day she first met Roland Calder at the hospital fundraiser, back when he was still just the charming donor with a practiced smile. Now, she couldn't tell if she was more afraid of what she'd discover or of what she already knew deep down. Across the fairground, Roland approached with his usual elegance button-down crisp hair, perfectly groomed. He waved politely at a parent he barely knew, bent to greet a child with rehearsed warmth. To the world, he was impeccable. To Marina, he looked like poison in a silk bottle. She tried to keep her voice steady.
Thank you for coming, Roland.
He leaned in to kiss her cheek. She turned away. His smile didn't falter. Everything all right? Yes, she lied. I just wanted to speak, somewhere quiet. He nodded and gestured toward the side of the gymnasium where the crowd thinned. They walked together past the photo booth, under the old oak tree where Arden had once built her fourth-grade science project from chicken wire and a flashlight. That memory flickered in Marina's chest like a distant warning. From across the field, June Tavares sat on a bench with a balloon tied to her wrist, pretending to be a teacher on lunch duty. Her earpiece was discreet. Behind her, 2 internal affairs officers strolled as if taking in the sights. Arden stood at the perimeter of the field, hands wrapped around Finn's leash. The shepherd was leaner now, but alert eyes sharp, body still as stone. He hadn't barked once, but he hadn't taken his eyes off Roland since the man arrived. Marina reached into her purse and pulled out a folded page of the scholarship program ledger, red lines traced in her daughter's handwriting. She didn't give it to him. She held it between them. Do you remember Emily Lark? She asked quietly. Roland blinked. Of course. Sweet girl. Asthma, I think. We helped her family, didn't we? She disappeared 3 months after your funding began. Her aunt was a caseworker. She kept records. I've seen them. His eyes narrowed by a fraction. You've been reading things you don't understand. I understand enough, Marina said, louder now. Enough to know you lied to me for years. Across the lawn, Finn growled low and deep. Arden's grip tightened. June stood up. Roland stepped forward, voice low and patronizing. Marina, I know you're upset, but grief does things. You're still recovering. You've always been emotional. Don't you dare gaslight me, she snapped. He stilled. For a heartbeat, it felt like the music from the fair dimmed, and then Finn surged forward with a bark that cut through the noise like a gunshot. He didn't lunge, stopped, rigid, in front of Arden, his eyes locked on Roland, his body trembling, but controlled. June's voice crackled through the comm. Alert posture confirmed. Same as previous case file D. 17. B. The officers moved, subtly circling. Roland glanced around and took a step back, his face paling. Arden stepped forward. He remembers you, she said quietly. He always did. You don't know what you're talking about, Roland hissed. I know about the trial, Arden said. The labs, the missing kids. You used him, and you didn't cover your tracks as well as you thought. Em saying, Marina's voice, quieter now but full of steel. I opened my eyes too late, but I'm opening them now. Roland's mask slipped just for a second rage behind charm. But it was enough. June nodded. Internal Affairs stepped in. Mr. Calder, one of them said, flashing a badge. We need you to come with us. There are questions regarding your involvement in multiple closed investigations. Roland's jaw clenched. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? Yes, Arden said, eyes burning. And so does he. She looked down at Finn. He didn't growl now. He just stood by her side, silent, watchful, victorious. The world didn't end with sirens. It ended, for Roland Calder, with a snarl, a silence louder than any alarm. The crowd at the school fair hadn't dispersed after the officers approached. In fact, they lingered like leaves caught in a windless moment, unsure whether to move or hold their breath. Children clung to their parents, teachers whispered. A few phones were lifted, recording discreetly, nervously. But Arden? She stood rooted, not in fear, in clarity. Roland had been temporarily pulled aside for questioning. His tone remained smooth, his gestures still that of a benefactor falsely accused. There's clearly been some mistake, he said for the 5th time, smile tense. This is a misunderstanding. Arden is young, impressionable. She's been through trauma. He turned to her own last gamble. "Arden," he said gently, voice dipped in poison, "let's just step away and talk. No police, no spectacle, just you and me, like family." She stared at him, heart knocking in her chest. And for a moment, a very brief, very dangerous moment, their feet nearly moved. Then Finn growled. It wasn't a warning. It was a memory. A sound etched from deep in his ribs, where pain still pulsed. The same growl Arden had heard once when she was 5 and tried to reach into a wire fence. The same growl he'd used on the night he collapsed by her porch, shaking, wet, hunted. But now, it was directed not at her, but for her. Roland froze, and June stepped forward. "No," she said firmly, pulling her badge from under her coat. "You don't get to isolate her anymore." Roland's eyes flicked to her, cold and calculating. "Officer!" "Detective Tavares," she corrected. "With Internal Affairs. You're under investigation for conspiracy, medical fraud, obstruction of justice, and endangering minors." Gasps rippled through the crowd. June lifted a thin, folder-clear cover, red-stamped pages visible. Arden didn't need to read it to know what it held. Finn's K9D, 17 record, handler notes, surveillance logs, photographs, the funding trail, testimonies, missing children linked through scholarship rosters and clinical trial rosters, and the most damning of a scan of Roland's signature approving the release of experimental neuropharma into facilities labeled educational outreach. "This is a setup," Roland barked, stepping backward. "This is political. Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "We do," June replied. "Which is why we waited until now, until all eyes could see." 2 plainclothes officers flanked him now. Their movements weren't rushed, but inevitable, like gravity. One pulled out cuffs. Roland's mask shattered. "You little brat," he hissed at Arden. "You think you know what you're doing? You're throwing away everything your mother—" "Stop," Marina said, stepping forward. She looked at him with eyes full of something colder than hate truth. "I believed you because I wanted to," she whispered. "And now I'll never stop apologizing to my daughter for that. But I will never, never let you touch our lives again." The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were watching. Some recording. Some crying. A teacher turned away, sickened. A father whispered to his son, "That's why we listen when dogs growl." Roland lunged, not violently, but in desperation. One final step toward Arden. And Finn didn't bite. He didn't bark. He simply moved in front of her. Like a wall made of instinct and fury and years of betrayal, Roland stopped dead in his tracks. He looked into the eyes of a dog who had once belonged to Himanse, trusted him, and saw no fear, only judgment, only memory. "Take him," June said. The cuffs clicked. Roland flinched, and the world finally breathed again. As they led him away through the gauntlet of stunned faces, Arden knelt and wrapped her arms around Finn. He licked her hand, gentle this time. He remembered, she whispered into his fur. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The headlines came first. They were everywhere before the dust even had time to settle. The dog who saw through the mask Finn, the German Shepherd. From stray to silent hero, Arden called her, the girl who listened when no one else did. People didn't know what to say. So they read. They shared. They whispered. And slowly, they started remembering. Remembering the times Finn had growled near Roland's car. Remembering how the dog refused to step into the Foundation's lobby. The night he broke from his leash and tried to dig near the elementary's west wall. Signs they once labeled as trouble or aggression. Now they had another name for it. Warning. Some apologized directly. Others brought treats and letters left gently on Arden's porch in brown paper bags. As if words alone wouldn't be enough. A retired teacher sent flowers. A councilwoman left a handwritten note in Finn's nameplate slot at the vet clinic. "We're sorry we ever doubted your instincts. Thank you for protecting our children." But the town's guilt wasn't the loudest part. The silence was. At school, Arden walked hallways like a living footnote in someone else's miracle. Teachers paused mid-lecture when she entered. Classmates moved Acidono cruelly, not even awkwardly. Reverently. Like she'd touched something too raw to define. Like she'd lived inside a truth most people spend their lives denying. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her notebook, once filled with scribbled questions, now stayed folded beneath her arm like a badge. She didn't show it anymore. But people knew. She'd been right. She'd seen behind the curtains. So had Finn. He sat beside her at the coffee shop, now permitted entry, without a second glance. No longer the stray or that aggressive dog. His eyes watched everything, not with suspicion, with memory. June stopped by once, in plain clothes, to drop off a copy of Finn's full-service file. "You should have this," she'd said simply. "He earned more than paperwork. He earned someone who'd never rewrite his story again." Marina? She still looked at her daughter like she'd missed years she could never get back. But something in her had shifted too. Each night, she sat longer at the kitchen table, researching. Not scrolling, not judging, just learning. Sometimes, she'd glance at Finn, curled under the window, and murmur, "I should have known." Arden never answered. Some truths didn't need echoing. And the town small, bruised, healing slowly came to a reckoning. The dog had never been lost. They had. The air held a different kind of weight that morning. Not heavy, just charged. Like the town itself had paused, breath held between memory and redemption. The ceremony wasn't grand. There were no brass bands, no red carpets, just folding chairs on the courthouse lawn. A small podium dressed in blue and gold fabric, a few flags catching the soft breeze. But to Arden, it felt like the world had finally remembered something it had forgotten far too long. Finn stood beside her, head high, shoulders squared. The leather collar they'd given him gleamed in the morning sun, stitched with a silver tag that now read, K9, D17. Finn. Service recognized. Mission. Loyalty. He didn't flinch at the camera clicks, didn't blink at the sea of unfamiliar faces. His ears moved slightly at the sound of June's voice approaching the microphone. "This town owes a debt," she began, "to a young girl who refused to be silent, and to a K9 officer declared missing in action who never stopped completing his mission." There was a hush, not of disbelief, but reverence. She turned to Finn and Arden, and her voice softened. "Finn, by order of the Oak Hollow Police Department and the State K9 Recognition Board, we honor you today, not just for service rendered, but for service continued against all odds, without command, without praise, and without recognition, until now." She knelt slowly, with Courand pinned a navy ribbon to his collar. At its center, a bronze medallion, an eagle rising over a shield, the same symbol Arden had found, tucked under Finn's blanket so many nights ago. A memory once buried, now a badge. Finn didn't bark, didn't move. He simply turned his head eyes searching until they met Arden's, place-a-clinks, and then, gently, he sat. Beside her, as he always had. The crowd stood. Applause rose like a tit awkward at first, unsure of how to cheer for a dog. But then came louder claps, whistles, even a few tearful cheers. Someone yelled, "Good boy, Finn!" Someone else whispered, "He knew, all along." "Oh." Arden placed her hand over Finn's back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath beneath her fingers. And for the first time in months, her chest didn't feel tight with waiting. This was acknowledgement. This was healing. Marina clapped too quietly, but with pride in her eyes. And in the front row, a little boy with a cast on his leg saluted Finn with both hands. The world had tried to silence them, dismiss them, forget them, but not today. Today, the truth wore a medal. The house had never been this quiet. Not empty, just still, like it was listening. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything is intact on the surface, but nothing is quite the same underneath. It was well past midnight. Arden had gone to bed hours ago, though her bedroom light still glowed under the crack of the door. Upstairs, the hum of the heater pulsed gently through the vents. Outside, wind combed through the trees like fingers across harp strings. In the living room, only two figures remained. Finn lay curled by the fireplace, his breathing slow, deep. A folded blanket rested beneath him, though he hadn't used it. He never did. Just having it nearby seemed to be enough. Marina stood in the doorway for a long time before she moved. No glass of wine, no phone, just herb or foot, shoulders hunched, fingers wrapped around each other like she was keeping herself from falling apart. She walked over slowly, Saturday down beside him. Not stiffly like someone afraid of dog snow that fear had burned off weeks ago, but carefully, like someone afraid of being forgiven. Finn stirred, lifting his head. His eyes met those same eyes she once called unnerving. Now she couldn't look away. "I was wrong," she whispered, voice barely audible. "So wrong." She reached a trembling hand toward him, stopping just short of his fur.
I thought you were a threat, that you were dangerous, that you were going to hurt her."
Her eyes filled, lashes wet in the firelight. "But you weren't the danger. You were the warning. You were the only one trying to protect her." She drew a breath, thick with guilt, the kind that doesn't ask to be excusedly acknowledged. "I owe you more than an apology, but I don't know how else to say this." Her voice cracked. "Thank you for not giving up on her, even when I did." Finn didn't move at first. Then softly, quietly, he shifted closer. No theatrics, no tail wag, no bark of forgiveness. He simply lowered his head onto her lap and stayed there. Marina froze, as if afraid she'd imagined it. But the weight was real, warm, heavy, grounding. She laid her hand on his neck. His heartbeat was steady, strong. It pulsed beneath her fingertips like a truth that couldn't be shaken calm, unwavering, as if all the chaos of the past weeks had never touched him. And yet, he had absorbed it all. Every tension, every silence, every look that lingered too long. Every time Arden flinched when Roland reached for a glass behind her. Every moment of doubt Marina had buried just beneath her practiced smiles. Now, Finn was still. Not sleeping. Just there. Letting her touch him. Letting her feel what she'd refused to see. And as Marina's hand trembled slightly, her other arm curled across her own chest, like she was trying to hold herself together. Her breath stilled. Not frozen. Just waiting. Then softly her shoulders sagged. A single exhale escaped her lips, almost imperceptible. And her tears, long withheld, finally slipped past her lashes. Quiet, undramatic, but real. They soaked into his fur like whispered confession tones she hadn't yet spoken aloud. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, she knelt there on the hardwood floor of their living room, knees aching, pride forgotten, her hand resting on the back of the one soul in the house who had never wavered, the dog who had warned her, protected her daughter, waited, without judgment, for her to finally see. Finn didn't move, didn't pull away. He just accepted either touch, her weight, her grief, as if to say, "I know. I was never angry. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Across the room, Arden stood in the hallway, unnoticed. She had meant to walk past, to go upstairs, to let the day finish without a scene. But something in the silence had drawn her attention. And now, she was rooted in place, arms folded, fingers gripping the soft edges of her hoodie sleeves. Her breath caught in her throat, not from fear or tension, but from a kind of delicate ache she couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger anymore, not even vindication. It was something softer, something that lived between sorrow and understanding. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She just watched. Watched as her mother, the woman who had always had answers, who had dismissed and deflected and defended Roland until the walls themselves seemed to echo with doubt, sat silently on the floor, holding on to the one creature in the house who told the truth from the beginning. This wasn't the apology Arden had imagined. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic realizations, no tearful, "I should have believed you," no begging for forgiveness, no storm of maternal regret. Just this, a woman broken open, wordless, pressing her fears and guilt into a dog's fur like it was holy ground. And maybe that was better, because somehow it said more. There are some moments so fragile, so full, they hum with everything unsaid. This was one of them. The way Marina's fingers curled slightly into Finn's fur, not to hold him, but to ground herself. The way Finn finally exhaled own slow breaths, if releasing the tension he'd been holding too. And the way Arden, though still just a teenager, suddenly felt older than she had minutes before. She had carried this secret, trusted her instincts when no one else did, protected herself with silence when words would have only cracked the facade. She'd waited not out of weakness, but because she knew truth always surfaced eventually. even if it comes late. Even if it arrives on its knees, with tears soaking into a dog's back instead of an apology spoken aloud. Marina finally shifted. She sat back slightly, wiping her cheek with the edge of her sleeve. Her voice, when it came, was so quiet it nearly vanished. "I didn't want to see it," she said, barely audible. "Because if I saw it, I'd have to admit I let it in." Finn lifted his head just a little, his eyes meeting hers. Not accusing, just present. "I thought I was protecting you," she continued. "That keeping things normal would be safer. But I was protecting the wrong thing." Her hand stayed on him. "I should have trusted him, and I should have trusted you." At that, Arden finally stepped into the room. Softly. No words, just a small step, and then another. She didn't rush into her mother's arms, didn't collapse into a dramatic embrace. She simply lowered herself to the floor beside Finn opposite her mother and laid a hand beside hers on the dog's back. Their fingers didn't touch, their eyes didn't meet right away. But the air between them shifted. It stopped being cold. For a while, none of them spoke. Finn blinked slowly. The light from the setting sun caught the edges of his fur, painting him in warm gold. The silence was no longer sharp. It was heavy, yes, but also full of breath. Like something sacred had passed through the room and left behind its stillness. Marina was the first to move. She sat back further and leaned against the edge of the couch, her gaze falling on Arden. Her eyes were still rimmed with red, but no longer distant. "Did you always know?" she asked gently. Arden shook her head. "Not at first. I just felt something was off." But Finhay knew right away. Marina nodded slowly. "He tried to tell me. I didn't listen." "You weren't ready?" Arden said, surprising herself. Marina gave her a sad smile. "That's no excuse." "No," Arden agreed. "But it's still the truth." There was something strange about this moment. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the hurt, but it offered something else. A beginning. Not clean, not perfect, but real. Finn stood up, stretched gently, and moved between them, resting his head on Arden's knee before flicking his tail once toward Marina. It was the closest thing to a benediction they would ever get. That night, they didn't talk much. Marina made tea. Arden fed Finn. They sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, sipping in silence. Before bed, Marina paused at Arden's door. "Would it be okay if I took him with me for a bit? Just a walk around the block?" Arden blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "I think I need to earn back his trust, too." Arden smiled faintly. He never lost it. He just waited. Marina didn't reply, but her eyes shimmered again. She knelt, clipped the leash on Finn, and whispered, "Let's go, brave boy." He wagged his tail just once and followed her out the door. And for the first time in weeks, Arden didn't feel like she was the only one who saw what was real. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Arden stared at the blank post, fingers hovering, breath held. 1,000 versions of this first sentence had lived in her head for weeks, some poetic, some angry, others just too much. But now, in the hush of her room, with the rain soft tapping the window pane and Finn asleep at her feet, she typed the only words that felt real. "My name is Arden Hollow, and this is the story of the dog who saw what no one else dared to." She paused. Let the truth of it settle. Finn let out a sleepy sigh below, paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. The blog had been her idea. Not June's, not her mother's, not the journalists who begged for interviews after Roland's arrest. This wasn't about headlines. This was for the quiet ones. The kids in classrooms who stared too long out windows. The ones who felt too much. The ones who noticed what others missed and were told that made them strange. She titled the blog, "Eyes That See Differently," and beneath it, she wrote, "When adults told me I was imagining things, he didn't. When the world saw a threat, he saw a friend. When no one believed me, he barked until they did." She added a photo Finn beside her on the steps of City Hall, metal on his collar, tongue lolling out like he couldn't care less about the spotlight. And maybe he didn't. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He did it because he knew. Because dogs don't care about status or denial or convenient lies. They care about the truth, about loyalty, about you. Arden wrote late into the night, She didn't try to explain every detail, just told the story like she remembered it. The first growl, the secrets, the silence, the noise, the moment everything cracked wide open. She didn't name names, but she named the feeling. If something inside you says something's wrong, listen. If a dog stands between you and someone smiling too much, believe him. Sometimes the smallest instinct is your loudest protection. By the time she hit publish, the sky outside had lightened to that gray blue that only exists before sunrise. She leaned back, eyes heavy, but heart finally light. Finn shifted in his sleep and lifted his head. Their eyes met. She smiled, voice barely a whisper. "Ready for the next chapter, boy?" His tail thumped once. The envelope was thicker than most. June had handed it to Arden without a word, her badge clipped beside a rare smile. "You might want to sit down for this one," she'd said, placing it gently on the kitchen table like something sacred. Arden waited until Finn curled beside her, chin resting on her socked foot, like always, like he knew. She opened the envelope slowly. Dozens of folded letters spilled out, hand addressed in penmanship both trembling and strong. The first line of the first letter stopped her breath. "We never thought anyone would care again." Arden's throat tightened as she read on. They were from parents, aunts, foster moms, siblings, people who had whispered names into missing persons' phone lines for years only to be met with apologies, dead ends, silence. Now, they were writing to her. To Finn. "Thank you for digging. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing when no one else would." One letter had tiny handprints drawn in marker at the bottom. Another simply said, "She used to dream of a dog who protected her. We didn't understand. Now we do." Halfway through the pile, a smaller envelope fell loose. It was cream-colored, sealed in gold foil. June had circled back just for this one, slipping it in last. Inside, a single photo and one line of text. The photo showed a girl no older than 10 smiling on a hospital bed. IV taped to her arm, eyes too wide for her age. Her hair was cropped unevenly, like someone had cut away shackles. But her smile was real, and in her hand, she clutched a stuffed German shepherd. The note read, "Her name is Celia. She was found last week, alive. She kept asking if the dog who found her had fire in his eyes." Arden blinked hard. Vision swimming. Finn stirred. Ears twitching. Eyes locking on hers. "You found her," Arden whispered, running a hand down his back. "You did that." Finn didn't move. He just breathed steady, calm, like he'd always known this day would come. Outside, somewhere in the stillness, a wind stirred the trees. Not everything was fixed. Not every child was home. But some were, because of a girl who wouldn't stay quiet, because of a dog who never stopped watching, because sometimes the smallest howl echoes the loudest. The late afternoon sun slanted through the pines like ribbons of molten gold, dappling the narrow trail where a little girl once lost her way. Now, years later, Arden Blakethaler, surer. A quiet confidence, replacing old uncertainty, walked that same path with measured steps. Pine needles cushioned every footfall, releasing a scent that felt like memory itself. At her side padded Finn. His muzzle had silvered at the edges, and the scar above his right eye was softer now, half hidden beneath a winter-thick coat. Yet every movement still carried the purposeful grace of a seasoned guardian. Ears flicking toward distant bird calls, nose lifting to test the wind, shoulder ever so slightly angled to keep Arden inside a protective arc. The creek came into Viewa, thin ribbon of water laughing over stones. Arden's breath caught. Here. This was the exact bend where she'd first seen him, broken and bleeding, half buried in mud, where a 9-year-old girl had decided fear could wait until after kindness. They paused at the bank. Water mirrored the sky, and alder leaves drifted in lazy circles. Finn lowered his head to drink, lapping slowly, as if tasting both the present and the past. Arden crouched, fingertips skimming the surface. Cold, honest. "Funny," she murmured, voice barely louder than the breeze. "Back then, I thought I was rescuing you." Finn looked up. In his amber eyes glowed something unchanged by time. The steady awareness that had once dismantled an empire of lies. She smiled. the expression carrying every chapter they'd shared, storms and secrets, courtrooms and medals, apologies whispered in the hush between heartbeats. Reaching into her coat pocket, she pulled out a small brass whistle, weathered, silent now that its work was done. She let it dangle from its chain, catching the sun. "We don't need this anymore, do we?" she asked. Finn's tail thumped once against the moss. They moved together onto the flat stone that jutted like a miniature peninsula into the creek. The same stone where Arden had sheltered him with her rain-soaked coat. She sat cross-legged. He lay beside her, head resting on her boot. Somewhere overhead a hawk cried, sailing into the burnished horizon. Arden drew a breath. "I started writing again," she said, eyes tracing the water's slow swirl. Kids send messages to the blog, everyday stories about how they listened when a pet tried to warn them, or how they spoke up even when adults laughed. Her voice warmed. "They're brave, Finn. Braver than I ever was." He shifted closer, pressing his weight into her shin in quiet affirmation. "And Mom," Arden continued, "she's applying to join an ethics board. Says it's never too late to stand on the right side." A soft laugh. "I guess you changed all of us." The forest answered with wind through needles, a whispering applause. Arden glanced sideways, studying the dog who was once a code number, then a liability, then a miracle. There were lines of age now, but also a peace that had not existed in those first haunted months. She leaned in, forehead brushing his. "You didn't just save me," she whispered, voice threading through the hush of the clearing. "You taught me how to fight for what's right." Finn's eyes half closed, and he gave a low, contented rumble, part sigh, part promise kept. He nudged her palm with his nose, the cool metal of his service tag grazing her skin. K9D17 had come full circle, from lost asset to legend, from evidence bag to badge of honor. Together they sat until the sun dipped behind the ridge and the creek turned copper. When shadows stretched long, Arden stood and dusted pine needles from her jeans. "Ready to head home, partner?" Finn rose, joints cracking softly but spirit-light. He shook once-selusing droplets into a quick prism of color, then fell into rhythm at her side. They left the stone, the creek, the echoes of a beginning rewritten. And as they walked back through the fading forest, two silhouettes sewn human, one canine emerged with the gathering dusk. A testament that courage sometimes wears paws, and truth can hinge on a single growl in the dark. The trail bent toward home. They followed it together. In the end, this story is not just about justice, it's about the silent, steadfast love between a girl and her dog. Finn, the German shepherd who once bore the weight of betrayal and misunderstanding, became more than a protector. He became a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and truth. Through him, we're reminded that animals don't just fill our homes, they fill our hearts, often teaching us lessons no textbook ever could. This journey speaks to the quiet instincts children carry, the importance of listening to those without voices, and the courage it takes to stand alone until someone stands with you. Arden's bond with Finn proves that healing comes not from perfection, but from connection. Let this be a tribute to every dog whose eyes see what we can't, to every German shepherd who serves with bravery, and to every child who refuses to stay silent when something feels wrong. Because sometimes, the heroes we need walk on four legs, and sometimes the truth comes wrapped in fur, with eyes full of fire and love.